You wake up and reach for your phone. The screen lights up with notifications, messages, app alerts, calendar reminders. Your birthday. The date stares back at you with an expectation you don't quite feel. There's no surge of anything particular. No excitement, no dread. Just the familiar weight of Wednesday or Tuesday, or whatever day it happens to be. The light coming through your window looks the same as yesterday. Your body feels continuous with the person who fell asleep last night. And yet the calendar insists something fundamental has shifted, that today, somehow, you should feel different. This is the peculiar silence of birthday indifference. Not the hot rebellion of someone who hates birthdays, who actively rejects the ritual with pointed refusal. Not the gray flatness of depression, where nothing registers as meaningful. Something quieter than both. A simple, unremarkable neutrality. The birthday arrives and departs like any other rotation of the earth, marked only by others' expectations that you should mark it yourself. We're going to spend the next few hours exploring the psychology of people who experience birthdays this way. Not those who rage against celebration, but those for whom the whole apparatus simply fails to achieve significance. This distinction matters. Active rejection reveals one psychology, the person who feels something strong enough to push against. Passive indifference reveals another entirely, a fundamental architecture of meaning that doesn't recognize birthdays as noteworthy in the first place. What psychologists call temporal landmarks, those dates that should punctuate our experience of time, have variable salience. They matter intensely to some people and barely register for others. This isn't pathology. It's not the anhedonia that accompanies depression, that inability to feel pleasure in anything. It's something more specific, a personal phenomenology that diverges from cultural scripts about what should feel important. Your birthday is an invention, a social agreement. And like all agreements, some people never signed on. Before we can understand why, we need to ask a more fundamental question. Why did birthdays become marked days at all? What does that reveal about how humans construct significance from the raw material of time? Let's begin there, with the anthropology of marking time itself. Chapter 1. The Anthropology of Marking Time. The Invention of Birthday Significance. The birthday as you know it, cake, candles, cards proclaiming your specialness, is a remarkably recent invention. For most of human history, individual birth dates simply weren't tracked with any precision. This wasn't neglect. It was irrelevance. In pre-industrial societies, age operated communally. You weren't 12 years old. You were part of the cohort initiated together, the group that moved as one through childhood into adolescence into adulthood. The Maasai had age sets that progressed through life stages collectively. Medieval European peasants often couldn't tell you their exact age. They knew seasons, harvests, whether they were old enough for certain work. The individual birthday, that precise anniversary of your emergence into the world, mattered far less than your position within the social structure. Even when births were recorded, it was primarily administrative. The church needed baptism dates. Governments needed census data. But celebration? That came much later, filtering down from aristocracy in 18th and 19th century Western Europe, where the wealthy had the luxury of individualism and the records to track such things. The birthday party as middle-class ritual is barely older than industrialization itself. Before this, birth held significance in different registers entirely. Astrological traditions treated birth as cosmic event, the moment when celestial configurations imprinted themselves onto a soul. But this wasn't about annual celebration. It was about fate, about reading the universe's intentions. Your birth chart mattered infinitely more than your birthday dinner. Rites of passage and social renewal. Anthropologist Victor Turner gave us language for understanding what rituals actually do. He called it liminality, that threshold state between what you were and what you're becoming. Rituals create and manage these transitions. They take ambiguous, frightening changes and give them structure, meaning, social recognition. The birthday operates as one such ritual, though we rarely think of it this way. Arnold van Gennep mapped the tripartite structure of rites of passage, separation from your old status, the liminal period of transition, and finally incorporation into your new identity. Birthdays compress this into microcosm. For that one day, you're set apart, celebrated, acknowledged, temporarily special. Then you're reincorporated into ordinary life, but with your new age, your continued existence, socially validated. This is what birthdays actually accomplish beneath the frosting and gift wrap. They're annual renewals of your membership in the social world. The celebration says, "We recognize you. We mark your persistence. We reaffirm that you belong." Year after year, the ritual repeats, and with each repetition, you're woven more securely into the collective fabric. Which means when someone opts out, they're declining more than cake. They're stepping outside this cycle of social renewal. They're saying their identity doesn't require annual reaffirmation from the group. This can be read as independence or isolation, confidence or alienation, depending on context. But it's always, in some sense, a rejection of the social contract that birthdays represent. The commercialization of personal milestones. Then came Hallmark. The early 20th century saw something unprecedented, the industrialization of sentiment. What had been organic expression, handwritten notes, personally chosen gifts, homemade celebrations, became productized, standardized, sold back to people as mandatory ritual consumption. Joyce C. Hall founded Hallmark cards in 1910, and by mid-century, the birthday card industry had convinced Americans that love could be demonstrated through $5.30 in the greeting card aisle. This wasn't innocent evolution. Consumer capitalism actively colonized temporal markers, transforming them into commercial opportunities. The birthday became a spending obligation. The economy now depended on your willingness to purchase proof of affection, to signal care through branded sentiment. The card, the gift, the dinner reservation, all proxies for genuine relational effort, all far easier to commodify. And here's where psychology meets economics. Some people recognized this substitution and recoiled. When commercial scripts replace authentic connection, a certain type of person withdraws entirely. They see through the performance. The Hallmark birthday feels like theater, like going through motions designed more to sell products than express actual care. For these individuals, treating their birthday as unmarked becomes a refusal to participate in the commodification of intimacy. It's not that they don't want connection. They want connection that doesn't come shrink-wrapped. Cross-cultural variations in birthday salience. But step outside the Western, commercialized model, and you'll find birthday significance is far from universal. Traditional East Asian age reckoning systems had everyone aging simultaneously on New Year. Your individual birth date might be recorded, but celebration happened collectively. You turned a year older when everyone did, a fundamentally different relationship to time, age, and identity. In many Catholic and Orthodox cultures, name days, the feast day of the saint you're named after, carry more weight than birthdays. Your connection to sacred tradition, to the communion of saints, matters more than your biological emergence. Some cultures track lunar calendars, making the same birthday fall on different solar dates each year, rendering the Western fixation on calendar dates somewhat absurd. Jehovah's Witnesses reject birthday celebration entirely on theological grounds, seeing it as pagan tradition incompatible with Christian devotion. The only birthdays mentioned in the Bible, they note, involve beheadings and excess. Their abstention isn't personality-driven indifference, it's principled refusal. But it demonstrates something crucial. You can live a full, meaningful life in community without ever marking your birthday, and suffer no psychological deficit from it. These cross-cultural variations reveal birthday significance as constructed, not natural. There's nothing inherent in the Earth's orbit that makes your personal anniversary meaningful. We made it meaningful. Western individualistic culture made it meaningful in a particular way, at a particular historical moment, for particular economic and social reasons. Emil Durkheim wrote about collective effervescence, that electricity that runs through a group engaged in shared ritual. Birthdays can generate this, the gathered friends, the sung song, the moment of unified attention on one person. It binds the group, creates memory, reinforces belonging. This is real and valuable. Rituals do important psychological work. But, and this matters, ritual participation isn't psychologically mandatory. Durkheim was describing how societies cohere, not prescribing how individuals must behave. Some people find collective effervescence claustrophobic rather than nourishing. Some find the performance of gratitude depleting. Some simply don't experience the transcendence that communal ritual promises. Ritual abstention can be a form of cultural critique. When you treat your birthday as unremarkable, you're quietly challenging the assumption that individual existence requires annual public validation. You're questioning whether temporal markers assigned by culture deserve your emotional investment. You're living as if the calendar doesn't have authority over your interior experience. Because it doesn't, unless you grant it. This isn't pathology. It's not brokenness. Understanding birthdays as cultural inventions helps us see that treating them as normal days isn't a deviation from human nature. It's actually a return to a historical baseline, a reconnection with the vast majority of human experience across time and culture, where your specific birth date simply didn't carry the weight that contemporary Western society insists it must. So the question shifts. If birthday significance is learned, culturally transmitted, historically contingent, why do some people internalize it so completely while others remain unmoved? What psychological architecture allows certain individuals to stand outside cultural scripts that feel almost gravitational to everyone else? That's where we turn next, to personality itself, to the internal structures that make some people celebration seekers and others utterly indifferent to the whole apparatus. Chapter 2. Personality Architecture and the Non-Celebrator. Big 5 Personality Correlates. Your personality isn't your fate, but it is your predisposition. The architecture of your temperament, how you process stimulation, derive meaning, orient toward goals, shapes your relationship with every ritual, including birthdays. Some personality configurations make celebration feel natural, even necessary. Others make it feel like wearing shoes 2 sizes too small. Start with extroversion, that fundamental dimension of how you metabolize social energy. The research here is clear. Extroverts gain energy from social interaction, from attention, from being the focal point of collective joy. Their nervous systems are wired to seek stimulation, to find reward in external engagement. A birthday party, with its attention, its performance demands, its collective focus on you, is designed precisely for the extrovert nervous system. Now reverse the polarity. Low extroversion doesn't mean you dislike people. It means your nervous system processes social stimulation differently. Where the extrovert feels energized by being celebrated, the introvert often feels drained. All those eyes on you. The expectation to perform gratitude, excitement, joy, on cue, for hours. The small talk with people you haven't seen in months who show up because it's your birthday. The sheer sensory and emotional volume of it. For introverts, birthdays aren't nourishing. They're depleting. The celebration meant to honor you becomes something you have to recover from. This creates a strange bind. You're supposed to feel grateful for an experience that exhausts you. Over time, many introverts resolve this cognitive dissonance by simply opting out. Treating the birthday as a normal day isn't rejection of love or community. It's self-preservation of limited social energy. Birthday celebrations are inherently extrovert rituals. They require performance, audience, collective effervescence. They assume that being the center of attention feels good rather than overwhelming. For a significant portion of the population, somewhere between a third and half, depending on how you measure introversion, this assumption is fundamentally wrong. Openness and nonconformity. Then there's openness to experience, that dimension measuring intellectual curiosity, aesthetic sensitivity, and willingness to question convention. High openness correlates with something relevant here, ritual skepticism. People high in openness don't accept traditions simply because they're traditional. They ask why. They examine the foundations. They see through arbitrary constructions to the scaffolding beneath. When you have high openness, birthdays reveal themselves as culturally constructed milestones rather than inherent truths. You recognize the arbitrary nature of celebrating one trip around the sun as if it means something cosmically significant. You notice that nothing actually changes between 11:59 p.m. the night before your birthday and 12:01 a.m. on the day itself. The Earth doesn't care. The universe doesn't mark it. Only humans do, and only recently, and only in certain cultures. This intellectual recognition can drain birthday significance of its emotional potency. Once you see the mechanism, how meaning is constructed, how rituals are inherited and replicated, participating in them can feel like going through motions you've already deconstructed. It's not cynicism exactly. It's clarity that sometimes makes earnest participation difficult. But here's the complication. High openness alone doesn't predict birthday indifference. Plenty of open, intellectually curious people love birthdays. They understand the arbitrariness and celebrate anyway, perhaps even more enthusiastically for recognizing it as a chosen meaning rather than an imposed one. Openness gives you permission to question, but it doesn't determine your answer. You might question birthdays and conclude they're beautiful human inventions worth embracing. Or you might question them and decide they're performances you no longer need. Openness opens the door. Other factors determine which way you walk through. Conscientiousness and future orientation. Conscientiousness brings us to temporal orientation. Highly conscientious people are organized, goal-directed, future-focused. They derive satisfaction from achievement, from making progress toward objectives, from moving the needle on meaningful projects. Their identity is built around what they're doing, where they're going, what they're building. Now consider what a birthday actually celebrates. Existence. Not accomplishment, just survival. Another year of being alive. You haven't necessarily achieved anything. You've simply persisted. The birthday is fundamentally backward-looking. It marks a past event, your birth, and the accumulated time since then. For the achievement-oriented mind, this can feel strangely empty. Highly conscientious individuals often operate within goal-directed temporal frameworks. They think in terms of milestones they've set for themselves. Finishing the project, reaching the promotion, mastering the skill. These are meaningful markers because they represent actual progress, evidence of effort and growth. Another year older doesn't fit this framework. Age happens passively. It's not an achievement. It's just time passing while you do or don't accomplish what matters to you. This creates a fundamental mismatch. The culture says your birthday is significant. Your internal measuring system says significance comes from directed effort toward chosen goals. These two meaning-making systems don't align. And when they conflict, the person high in conscientiousness often defaults to their internal compass. The birthday fails to register because it's not tracking what they actually value. You can be grateful to be alive, deeply grateful, and still find birthday celebration irrelevant to how you measure a life well lived. The celebration-oriented temporal framework and the progress-oriented temporal framework are simply solving different equations. The schizoid temperament. Now we enter more subtle territory. The word schizoid carries unfortunate connotations, so let's be precise. We're not talking about schizophrenia or psychosis. We're talking about a personality organization first described by psychoanalysts Ronald Fairbairn and Harry Guntrip. A particular way of being in the world characterized by preference for internal richness over external validation. The schizoid temperament finds satisfaction in ideas, imagination, solitary pursuits. Not because of social anxiety or trauma, though those can coexist, but because the internal world genuinely feels more engaging than the external one. These are the people who can spend entire weekends alone and emerge refreshed rather than lonely. Who prefer books to parties not because parties are frightening, but because books are simply more interesting. Crucially, this isn't antisocial. Antisocial implies violation of social norms, aggression, lack of empathy. The schizoid temperament is a social, genuine indifference to social reinforcement. They don't need your approval. They don't need your attention. They're not hostile to it. They're simply unmoved by it. Their sense of self maintains coherence without external input. You can see how this makes birthday indifference almost inevitable. The birthday's entire function is social, to receive attention, acknowledgement, validation from others. But if your temperament doesn't find these things rewarding, the whole ritual becomes pointless. It's not that you're refusing validation to be difficult. It's that validation doesn't register as valuable currency in your internal economy. The schizoid temperament also includes resistance to communal joy scripts. There's a certain expectation in group celebrations. Everyone should feel elevated, connected, emotionally synchronized. But some people's nervous systems don't synchronize that way. They observe the group emotion from a slight distance, intellectually understanding it, but not merging with it. This isn't dysfunction. It's constitutional difference. The critical distinction: we're discussing healthy schizoid traits, not schizoid personality disorder. The disorder involves pervasive impairment, inability to form relationships even when desired, restricted emotional range that causes distress. Healthy schizoid traits involve preference without pathology. You can have meaningful relationships. You just don't need many of them, and you don't need them to involve birthday celebrations to feel secure. Internal locus of control. Finally, consider Julian Rotter's concept of locus of control, that spectrum measuring whether you experience your life as self-directed or externally determined. People with strong internal locus of control believe their actions shape outcomes. They take responsibility for their successes and failures. Their identity is built around personal agency. Now think about what birthdays actually validate. They're external acknowledgments of your worth, your existence, your place in others' lives. The celebration says, "You matter because we say you matter." Your significance is conferred by the group's recognition. This is an inherently external validation structure. For someone with strong internal locus of control, this can feel backwards. Their sense of self doesn't require external acknowledgement. They know who they are through their choices, their actions, their internal standards. Whether others celebrate them or not doesn't change their self-continuity. They experience identity through personal agency, not through temporal markers that others assign significance to. This isn't arrogance. It's self-directedness. They're not claiming they don't need anyone. Humans are relational beings. But they don't need annual performative validation to maintain their sense of existing meaningfully. The birthday becomes redundant when you've internalized your own worth independent of external confirmation. Research by Vasilis Saraglu and others has shown that personality does predict ritual participation. People high in extroversion and agreeableness are more likely to engage with religious and cultural rituals. People high in openness and low in conscientiousness are more likely to question them. But these are tendencies, not determinisms. Personality creates inclinations, not destinies. Self-determination theory adds another layer. It posits three basic psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Birthday celebrations primarily serve relatedness, connection with others, belonging, recognition. But if your autonomy needs are higher than your relatedness needs, celebrations can feel like impositions rather than gifts. You might prefer connection on your own terms, in your own time, without the scripted structure of annual obligation. All of this explains predisposition. It shows us which personality configurations make birthday indifference more likely. But personality isn't fixed at birth. It develops in context, shaped by early relationships, attachment patterns, developmental experiences. To truly understand why someone doesn't need their birthday acknowledged, we must look at the relational blueprints formed in early life, at how your first experiences of love and recognition shaped what you came to need, or not need, from others. Chapter 3: Attachment Theory and the Birthday Response. Secure attachment, stable self-worth. Your first experiences of love created a template. Before you had language, before you had explicit memory, your nervous system was learning what to expect from others. Can I trust them to see me? Will they respond when I reach out? Am I worthy of attention without performing for it? These questions, asked and answered in infancy, shape how you experience being celebrated decades later. John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth gave us the foundational architecture of attachment theory in the mid-20th century. Their research revealed something profound. Infants whose caregivers consistently responded with attunement, seeing the child's needs, meeting them reliably, providing comfort without conditions, developed what Bowlby called a secure base. This wasn't just about having needs met. It was about learning that you matter inherently without having to earn it. When you grow up with secure attachment, something remarkable happens to your relationship with external validation. It becomes optional, not meaningless. Securely attached people still appreciate recognition, but not necessary for maintaining self-worth. Your internal working model already contains the message, you are valued. You internalized it so early and so deeply that you carry it everywhere, independent of whether others actively remind you. This has direct implications for birthday indifference. If you've internalized your worth, if your earliest relationships taught you that your existence is fundamentally welcomed, you don't need annual proof. The birthday celebration, for all its warmth and good intentions, becomes redundant. You already know you matter to the people who matter to you. Whether they sing to you once a year or simply coexist with you in ordinary time, your sense of being valued remains stable. Securely attached individuals often treat birthdays with a kind of relaxed acceptance. If others want to celebrate, fine, they can receive it graciously. If not, also fine. Their internal security doesn't depend on it. The celebration doesn't shore up some deficit. It doesn't fill a need that would otherwise go unmet. It's simply an option in a life already full of felt worth. This is birthday indifference from abundance, not deprivation. It looks similar to other forms of non-celebration on the surface, but the internal experience is completely different. The secure person isn't avoiding anything. They're simply not requiring anything. Avoidant detachment, preemptive indifference. Now consider a different developmental trajectory. Imagine a child whose early caregivers were physically present but emotionally unavailable. Not abusive, just distant, distracted, uncomfortable with emotional needs. The child reaches out and gets inconsistent response, or cool response, or none at all. The need doesn't disappear, but the child learns something crucial. Expressing need doesn't reliably lead to having it met. Often, it leads to rejection or indifference. The adaptive solution becomes self-reliance. The child learns to suppress attachment behaviors, to manage their own emotional states, to function as though they don't need anyone. This is the genesis of avoidant attachment, specifically the dismissive avoidant pattern. It's a brilliant defensive maneuver. If you convince yourself you don't need anything from anyone, you can't be disappointed when they fail to provide it. Fast forward to adulthood. This person has organized their entire psychology around not needing. They're independent, self-sufficient, proud of their ability to function without requiring support. And then comes the birthday, that ritual explicitly designed around receiving attention, recognition, care, celebration. The very structure of it triggers the vulnerability they've spent a lifetime defending against. For the avoidant person, birthdays can feel dangerous. Not consciously, perhaps, but somewhere in the nervous system, the birthday activates old fears. What if I let myself want this and no one shows up? What if I allow myself to feel that I deserve celebration and the universe confirms that I don't? The solution becomes preemptive indifference. Treat it as a non-event from the beginning. Don't want it, don't need it, don't even register it as significant. This way, you can't be hurt by others' potential failure to celebrate you adequately. There's adaptive value here. This strategy does prevent disappointment. If you genuinely don't care about your birthday, then underperformance by friends or family can't wound you. You've already protected yourself. But the cost is continued disconnection. By refusing to let the birthday matter, you also refuse opportunities for genuine recognition. You maintain the wall that early experiences taught you to build. The nuance matters tremendously. Sometimes this defense is necessary, even healthy, particularly if your current relationships still aren't safe for vulnerability. But sometimes it's outdated protection, a childhood solution still running in adulthood long after the original threat has passed. The birthday indifference becomes armor you no longer need, but can't quite remove. Anxious attachment, the other side. Understanding avoidant attachment illuminates its opposite. Anxiously attached individuals, those whose early caregivers were inconsistent, sometimes attuned and sometimes absent, developed a different strategy. Instead of suppressing need, they amplified it. If sometimes making a fuss led to getting care, then the logical adaptation is to make more fuss, to constantly seek reassurance, to never quite believe you're valued unless it's being actively demonstrated. For anxiously attached people, birthdays often become heavily invested events. Not because they love celebration intrinsically, but because the birthday serves as an annual test. Do people care enough about me? Will they remember? Will they show up? Will the celebration measure up to my need for reassurance? The birthday becomes a referendum on their worth, and the anxiety around it can be excruciating. This contrast illuminates the avoidant response, where the anxious person turns the birthday into high-stakes emotional measurement. The avoidant person opts out of the measurement entirely. They see the same test and refuse to take it. Both strategies emerge from insecure attachment, from childhoods where love felt conditional or uncertain. But they solve the problem in opposite directions, one by demanding proof, one by claiming not to need it. Disorganized attachment and ambivalence. Then there's disorganized attachment, perhaps the most painful pattern. This develops when early caregivers were themselves frightening or frightened, when the source of comfort was also the source of threat. The child can't develop a coherent strategy because approach and avoidance are both necessary simultaneously. The result is profound ambivalence, a nervous system that simultaneously craves and fears closeness. For people with disorganized attachment histories, birthdays trigger impossible conflicts. Part of them wants the visibility, the recognition, the proof that they matter. Another part fears the exposure, the intimacy, the vulnerability that comes with being seen and celebrated. They want the birthday to be special, and they want it to pass unnoticed. Both desires are genuine. Both are incompatible. Treating the birthday as a normal day can become a compromise solution. By claiming indifference, they avoid having to resolve the internal conflict. They don't have to want something they're terrified of receiving. They don't have to risk disappointment or the discomfort of being celebrated. The ambivalence gets managed by pretending there's nothing to be ambivalent about. This creates a particular loneliness. Unlike the secure person who genuinely doesn't need celebration, or even the avoidant person who has convinced themselves they don't, the disorganized person often does want recognition. They just can't tolerate actually receiving it. The birthday indifference becomes a protective lie, told to themselves as much as to others. The parentification dynamic. There's one more attachment-adjacent pattern worth examining: parentification. This occurs when a child becomes the emotional caretaker of their parent or family system. Maybe they had a depressed mother who needed cheering up. Maybe they mediated their parents' conflicts. Maybe they raised younger siblings while their own needs went unmet. The family structure inverted. The child managed adults' emotions rather than the other way around. For parentified children, birthdays often became complicated performances. Their birthday wasn't really about them. It was about making others feel like good parents, good family members, successful celebration organizers. The child learned to perform gratitude, to manage everyone else's emotions around the event, to ensure nobody felt bad about their efforts. The birthday became another form of emotional labor. As adults, these people often experience profound liberation in simply not celebrating. Finally, a birthday can pass without them having to manage anyone's expectations. They don't have to perform joy they don't feel. They don't have to reassure their mother that yes, it was perfect. Yes, they feel so special. They don't have to coordinate others' performances or soothe others' anxieties about whether they did enough. Treating the birthday as a normal day becomes an act of radical self-permission. For once, they can just be, without caretaking anyone else's emotional experience of their existence. The birthday becomes another obligation they're finally free to decline. This isn't coldness or ingratitude. It's exhaustion finally allowed to rest. Mary Main's adult attachment interview research showed that these patterns persist into adulthood with remarkable stability unless significant relational repair occurs. The way you learn to relate in your first years, the beliefs you formed about whether you deserve recognition, whether it's safe to want celebration, whether your existence itself is burden or gift, these continue shaping your birthday response decades later. Attachment patterns fundamentally shape celebration worthiness beliefs. Secure attachment whispers. You're worth celebrating, whether or not anyone does. Avoidant attachment insists. You don't need celebrating anyway. Anxious attachment demands. Prove you think I'm worth celebrating. Disorganized attachment contradicts itself. I desperately want and absolutely cannot tolerate being celebrated. The critical question for each person is whether their birthday indifference reflects healthy independence or defended self-sufficiency. Are you secure enough not to need celebration? Or are you protected enough not to risk wanting it? The external behavior looks identical. The internal experience is entirely different. But attachment is only one developmental dimension. There's another temporal factor at play: how your relationship with birthdays shifts across the entire lifespan, from childhood through old age. Some stages of life make birthdays feel crucial. Others render them nearly meaningless. Understanding this arc reveals why birthday indifference might not be fixed personality. It might be developmental stage, a phase of life where temporal markers simply matter less than they did before, or less than they will again. Chapter 4: Developmental Psychology, Age and the Shifting Meaning of Birthdays. Childhood. Birthdays as temporal anchors. Your relationship with your birthday isn't fixed. It transforms as you move through life stages, sometimes maturing intensely, sometimes fading to irrelevance. This isn't inconsistency, it's development. What birthdays mean shifts because what you're developmentally wrestling with shifts, and some stages render temporal markers nearly meaningless while others make them feel essential. Ask a 7-year-old how old they are and watch the precision. 7 3/4. Children track age with mathematical intensity because age is how they measure progress through childhood itself. Jean Piaget's cognitive development stages illuminate why. In the concrete operational stage, roughly ages 7 to 11, children become capable of logical thought about concrete objects and events. Time becomes something they can manipulate mentally, compare, sequence. For children, birthdays serve as temporal anchors in a life that otherwise lacks clear structure. You can't measure your progress toward adulthood by career achievements or relationship milestones. Those are years away, abstractly distant. But you can measure it by age. 8 is objectively closer to being a teenager than 7 was. 10 means double digits. 12 means almost adolescent. The birthday provides concrete evidence that you're advancing, growing, getting closer to the autonomy and capability you see in older siblings and adults. This is why birthdays matter so intensely when identity is still forming. The child's self-concept is unstable, still under construction. Who am I? Is answered partly through how old am I. Age becomes a load-bearing beam in the architecture of early identity. The birthday party, the cake, the presents, these aren't just celebration. They're ritualized acknowledgement that you've moved forward, that you're becoming more than you were. Children also lack the cognitive sophistication to see through cultural constructions. The birthday isn't arbitrary to them. It's objectively significant. They haven't yet developed the metacognitive capacity to question why one day should matter more than another. The culture says it matters, and they believe culture because they don't yet have the tools to interrogate it. Adolescence, identity crystallization. Erik Erikson mapped the central crisis of adolescence as identity versus role confusion. Who am I? What do I believe? Where do I fit? The teenager is constructing a coherent self from available materials: peer group, family expectations, emerging values, bodily changes, social feedback. During this tumultuous process, birthdays take on new significance, but a different kind than childhood's temporal measurement. Adolescent birthdays become markers of social status. The Sweet 16, the Quinceañera, the 18th birthday with its promise of legal adulthood, these aren't just numbers. They're social positions, gates opening or closing. The 16th birthday means driving in many U.S. states, which means freedom, mobility, independence. The 18th means voting, legal adulthood, moving out. These birthdays carry symbolic weight because they correlate with actual changes in social power and permission. But there's something else happening in adolescence. Peer comparison becomes paramount. Your birthday gets measured against others' birthdays, not just in date, but in celebration quality. Who threw the better party? Who got more impressive gifts? Who had more people show up? The birthday becomes social currency, a way to demonstrate your position in the adolescent hierarchy. It's performative proof that you're liked, valued, popular enough to gather a crowd. This makes adolescence a high-water mark for birthday investment, but not for everyone. The teenagers who opt out during this period are making a significant statement, usually one of nonconformity or alienation from the social hierarchy they're supposed to care about. Treating your 16th birthday as a normal day during the stage when it's supposed to be culturally momentous is a form of rebellion, conscious or not. Young adulthood, achievement orientation. Then something shifts. Daniel Levinson's research on adult development identified ages 22 to 28 as entering the adult world, a period of enormous transitions. You're establishing career, forming serious relationships, possibly starting families. Your identity is no longer primarily about age. It's about what you're accomplishing. This is where birthdays often begin losing meaning for the first time. The 23rd birthday, the 26th, they don't correlate with anything significant. They're not gateways to new permissions or capabilities. You're already legally adult. The cultural milestones have passed. What matters now are the milestones you set for yourself. The promotion, the degree completion, the relationship commitment, the creative achievement. There's a fundamental shift from being to doing as the basis of identity. Children and adolescents define themselves largely by what they are, their age, their grade in school, their family position. Young adults increasingly define themselves by what they do, their profession, their accomplishments, their choices. The birthday celebrates mere existence, the passive accumulation of years. Career and relationship milestones celebrate active achievement, the outcomes of directed effort. For highly achievement-oriented young adults, birthdays can begin feeling strangely empty. Another year older doesn't mean you've built anything. It's just time passing. The things that genuinely mark progress, finishing graduate school, landing the job, publishing the book, these happen on unpredictable schedules unrelated to your birth date. The birthday becomes temporally irrelevant to the identity construction that actually matters during this stage. This is often when people first articulate birthday indifference, often surprising themselves. They loved birthdays as children, cared about them as teenagers, and now suddenly in their mid-20s they realize they just don't. Nothing's wrong. They're not depressed. The birthday simply stopped registering as significant because significance has relocated to achievements rather than age. Middle adulthood, generativity and mortality salience. Middle adulthood brings another Ericksonian crisis, generativity versus stagnation. Am I contributing something meaningful? Am I leaving a legacy? Am I nurturing the next generation or creating something that outlasts me? These questions carry existential weight, and birthdays suddenly matter again, but now they're tinged with mortality. Terror management theory, developed by Greenberg, Solomon, and Piszczynski, reveals what happens when humans are reminded of their mortality. We engage in symbolic immortality projects, building legacies, doubling down on cultural worldviews, seeking meaning that transcends our finite existence. Birthdays in middle adulthood trigger mortality salience. You're not progressing toward anything anymore. You're aging. Each birthday is a step closer to death. People respond to this in opposing ways. Some amplify celebration, as if the party itself defies mortality, proves they're still vital, still accumulating experiences and relationships. The 40th birthday bash, the 50th birthday trip to Europe, these become elaborate rituals of continued vitality. Look how alive I still am. Look how much I still have. Others respond by minimizing temporal markers entirely. If birthdays remind you of mortality, stop marking them. Return to treating them as normal days. This isn't avoidance exactly, or not only avoidance. It can be a form of acceptance. Yes, I'm aging, but I don't need to ritualize it. I don't need annual reminders of my finitude. I'm comfortable enough with mortality that I don't need to either celebrate or mourn each approaching year. The crisis moments, turning 40, turning 50, reveal which strategy you've adopted. Some people experience these milestone birthdays as genuine crises, painful confrontations with aging. Others feel liberated from age consciousness entirely, recognizing that the number is arbitrary and their actual vitality or worth isn't measured in years survived. Late adulthood, ego integrity, and time transcendence. Erikson's final developmental stage is integrity versus despair. Can you look back on your life and see coherent meaning? Can you accept the choices you made, the person you became? Or are you haunted by regret, by the sense that you wasted your one chance at existence? Those who achieve integrity, and it's not everyone, develop something remarkable. They see their life as a whole, a complete pattern, rather than as discrete years. From this vantage point, individual birthdays become almost meaningless. What matters isn't that you're 83 versus 82. What matters is the arc, the narrative, the meaning you've constructed from decades of living. Lars Tornstam coined the term gerotranscendence to describe a shift in perspective some elderly people experience. They become less concerned with bodily needs, less focused on temporal markers, more comfortable with ambiguity and mystery. Material concerns fade. Social obligations feel less compelling. There's a movement toward what Tornstam called a cosmic perspective, seeing yourself as part of something larger, continuous, not bounded by birth and death dates. For people who reach this stage, birthdays lose significance not through bitterness or depression, but through transcendence. The birthday marks something that no longer feels central, individual age in linear time. When you've internalized both life's continuity and your own finitude, when you've made peace with mortality and meaning, the specific date of your birth stops mattering much. You exist in a different relationship with time itself. Laura Carstenson's socio-emotional selectivity theory adds another dimension. Her research shows that as people age and perceive their remaining time as limited, they prioritize emotionally meaningful experiences over novel ones. They narrow their social circles to the most significant relationships. They focus on present satisfaction rather than future-oriented goals. This has implications for birthdays. If you're prioritizing depth over breadth, if you're focused on the everyday quality of your closest relationships rather than annual performances, the birthday celebration may feel less necessary. You're already experiencing emotional richness. You don't need a designated day to gather people or feel valued. The everyday presence of loved ones suffices. Philip Zimbardo's research on time perspective shows that people orient differently toward past, present, and future at different life stages. Children are present-focused with some future orientation. Young adults skew heavily future-oriented. Middle adults balance between future concerns and present demands. Elderly people often become more past-reflective and present-focused. This creates a strange symmetry. Both very young children and very old adults may care least about birthdays, though for opposite reasons. Young children haven't yet learned to invest birthdays with significance. Elderly adults have learned to divest them of significance. Both exist in extended presence, less concerned with temporal markers, though children will grow into caring and elders have grown out of it. The paradox reveals something profound. Our investment in birthdays tracks with our investment in linear time itself, in age as identity component, in future as the primary locus of meaning. When you're in life stages where linear time matters intensely, when you're measuring progress, accumulating achievements, racing clocks biological or professional, birthdays matter. When you're in stages where time feels more cyclical or spacious, or simply less relevant to who you are, birthdays fade. For some people, birthdays lose meaning permanently in young adulthood and never regain it. They've shifted into a relationship with temporality that doesn't privilege annual markers. They're not developmentally behind or ahead. They've simply stepped into a different temporal framework, one where continuity matters more than anniversaries, where presence matters more than milestones, where identity flows independent of what number the calendar assigns. This isn't about age. It's about how you structure meaning in relation to time, and that's where we turn next. Chapter 5, Temporal Psychology and the Nonlinear Experience of Time. Chronos versus Kairos. Not everyone experiences time the same way. This sounds obvious, but we rarely consider its implications. Some people live inside clock time, measuring their lives in increments, marking progress through dated milestones. Others inhabit time differently, fluidly, qualitatively, without the sharp edges of calendrical demarcation. For these people, birthdays don't register because they exist in a temporal framework where annual markers simply aren't meaningful units of experience. The ancient Greeks had two words for time, and the distinction matters enormously here. Chronos is quantitative time, sequential, measurable, the relentless ticking of seconds into minutes into years. It's clock time, calendar time, the time of schedules and deadlines and aging. Chronos is what birthdays measure. Another revolution completed, another numerical increment added to your age. Kairos is qualitative time, the right moment, the opportune instant, time experienced through its content rather than its duration. Kairos is the moment of insight, the perfect timing of a conversation, the experience of being so absorbed that hours pass unnoticed. It's not measurable externally because its significance is internal, relational, contextual. Here's what matters for our inquiry. Some people orient their lives primarily around Chronos, others around Kairos. This isn't a choice you make consciously. It's a fundamental structuring of temporal consciousness. Chronos-oriented people track time, plan according to it, measure their lives through it. Birthdays fit naturally into this framework. They're chronological milestones, external temporal markers that organize experience. Kairos-oriented people live differently. They're attuned to the quality of moments rather than their position in linear time. They remember experiences by emotional texture, by significance, by what happened rather than when it happened. Ask them what year something occurred, and they often can't tell you, but they can describe the experience in vivid detail. For Kairos-oriented individuals, birthdays feel hollow because they're pure Chronos. They mark measurable time without necessarily containing meaningful time. Your birthday isn't a moment of Kairos, it's just a date. Nothing inherently significant happens on that date. It's only significant because culture insists it should be. The Kairos-oriented person experiences this insistence as arbitrary, even absurd. Why should one rotation around the sun matter more than any other? Where's the actual meaning? This isn't philosophical posturing. It's genuinely how their temporal consciousness functions. They can't make themselves care about chronological markers that don't carry Kairos, and birthdays, by their nature, rarely do. Flow states and timelessness. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi spent decades studying flow, that state of complete absorption where self-consciousness disappears, time distorts, and you merge with whatever you're doing. Athletes call it being in the zone. Artists call it inspiration. Researchers call it optimal experience. Whatever the label, flow involves a radical shift in temporal consciousness. When you're in flow, time becomes irrelevant. Hours pass like minutes, or minutes stretch with such richness that they contain what feels like hours of experience. Clock time loses authority. You're not checking your watch, not aware of aging or schedules or external temporal structures. You exist in what Csikszentmihalyi called the autotelic experience, activity that's rewarding in itself, independent of external goals or temporal frameworks. People who regularly access flow, and some personality types and professions make this more common, develop an unusual relationship with structured time. They've experienced repeatedly that the most meaningful moments in their lives occur outside conventional temporal consciousness. The deep work, the creative breakthrough, the intellectual epiphany, these happen in flow, in timelessness, not in calendar time. For these people, birthdays can feel like interruptions. You're supposed to pause whatever timeless engagement matters to you and acknowledge chronological time. You're supposed to step out of flow and into calendar consciousness, to notice that you're a year older, to perform gratitude for continued existence. But this violates their primary mode of meaningful experience. Creative and intellectual workers particularly may dismiss birthdays for this reason. If your identity is built around the work, around achieving flow states, producing something meaningful, engaging deeply with ideas or materials, then age becomes nearly irrelevant. What matters is the work's quality, not how many years you've been alive. The birthday doesn't mark anything real in your actual experiential world. It's an external imposition of chronological structure on a life organized around atemporal depth. This isn't everyone's experience. Plenty of creative people love birthdays. But there's a subset for whom flow is so central and temporal consciousness so regularly transcended that returning to calendar time for birthday acknowledgement genuinely feels strange, forced, incompatible with how they actually live. The eternal present, neurological perspectives. Neuroscience reveals that temporal consciousness isn't uniform. It's constructed by specific brain networks that function differently across individuals. The default mode network, particularly the medial prefrontal cortex and posterior cingulate cortex, activates during self-referential thinking, autobiographical memory, and imagining future scenarios. This network constructs your sense of existing across time, past, present, future, as a continuous self. But this network's activity varies dramatically. Some people have highly active default mode networks, constantly constructing narratives about who they were, who they are, who they'll become. Others have quieter default mode networks, spending more time in present moment awareness without elaborate self-narrative. Mindfulness practices deliberately quiet the default mode network. Long-term meditation practitioners show decreased activation in these self-referential brain regions. They report reduced concern with autobiographical memory, less planning for the future, more sustained attention to immediate experience. Research by Judson Brewer and others demonstrates that experienced meditators literally process time differently. They're less caught in past/future mental simulation, more anchored in present awareness. This has direct implications for birthday significance. If your default mode network is quiet, whether through meditation practice or constitutional differences in brain function, you're less engaged with autobiographical temporal markers. Your sense of self isn't strongly narrative. You're not constantly constructing stories about who you've been across time. You exist more fully in extended present. From this neurological state, birthdays lose salience. They're markers in a temporal narrative you're not actively constructing. They require you to think about yourself across time, to reflect on past years, to anticipate future ones. But if your brain isn't naturally oriented this way, if you live in present moment sensory and cognitive engagement rather than autobiographical time traveling, the birthday doesn't hook into anything neurologically active. This is living in what some contemplatives call the eternal present, not denying that time passes, but experiencing your consciousness as fundamentally here, now, rather than stretched across remembered past and imagined future. People in this state often can't relate to birthday celebration because it requires a temporal self-consciousness they've either transcended or never strongly developed. Temporal landmarks theory, revisited. Hung-Chin Dai, Catherine Milkman, and Jason Reese introduced the concept of temporal landmarks, significant dates that create mental separation between past and future selves. New Year's Day, the first day of a month, your birthday. These landmarks supposedly motivate fresh starts, new goals, renewed commitment to change. The research shows that many people do use these dates as psychological reset buttons. But here's what the research also shows. Not everyone does. Temporal landmarks only function as landmarks if you're constructing your identity narratively, with distinct chapters and discontinuities. If you see your life as a story with clear acts, before and after moments, the old you versus the new you, then temporal landmarks help demarcate those transitions. Dan McAdams' research on narrative identity reveals that people differ dramatically in how narratively they construct their lives. Some people have elaborate life stories with clear turning points, redemption arcs, contamination sequences. Others experience their identity as more continuous, fluid, without dramatic chapter breaks. They're the same person they've always been, just with accumulated experience. For people with continuous rather than episodic identity, temporal landmarks don't serve a psychological function. They're not trying to separate past self from present self. They're not using dates to motivate fresh starts because they don't experience their life as requiring fresh starts. It's one ongoing flow, one accumulated becoming. Birthdays are temporal landmarks only if you're writing your life in chapters. If you're not, if your identity feels continuous rather than episodic, the birthday doesn't mark anything psychologically meaningful. It's just another day in an unbroken stream of days, all part of the same ongoing you. This is a key insight. Birthday indifference often correlates with narrative identity style. Ask someone who doesn't celebrate their birthday to tell you their life story, and notice the structure. Often, you'll find less dramatic arc, fewer before and after moments, more sense of gradual, continuous development. They genuinely don't experience their life as divided into chapters that birthdays might separate. The Nietzschean eternal return. Friedrich Nietzsche posed a thought experiment. Imagine you had to live your exact life again, infinitely, every detail repeated eternally. Same joys, same sufferings, same mistakes, same triumphs, forever. Would you embrace this or despair? Nietzsche called this the eternal return, and he considered it a test of life affirmation. If you could joyfully accept infinite repetition of your life exactly as it is, you've achieved what he called a more fatty love of fate. You've embraced your existence without needing it to be different, without regret, without the notion that meaning comes from progress or change. For someone who's genuinely internalized this perspective, and some have, whether through philosophical conviction or contemplative practice, individual birthdays become metaphysically meaningless. If you're repeating your life eternally, then you've had infinite birthdays and will have infinite more. The specific occurrence of this year's birthday loses significance. It's not taking you anywhere. You're not progressing toward anything. You're eternally returning to the same moment. This flattens temporal markers completely. The birthday isn't a step forward because there is no forward, just eternal recurrence of the same pattern. If you love your fate, you love it wholly, not because each year brings you closer to some goal, but because existence itself, in its repetitive eternality, is enough. Very few people fully internalize this perspective, but even partial absorption of it transforms how you experience time. If meaning doesn't come from progress, if your life doesn't need to be going anywhere to be valuable, then markers of progression lose their power. The birthday stops being a milestone because you're not on a journey. You're simply existing, and that's sufficient. Existential philosophy more broadly. Heidegger's being toward death, Sartre's existence preceding essence, Camus' absurdist rebellion, all tend to destabilize conventional temporal markers. When you've spent time contemplating existence at the philosophical level, cultural constructions like birthday significance can seem almost childishly arbitrary. You've asked deeper questions about being, meaning, mortality. Whether you're 33 or 34 becomes trivial against those larger concerns. This isn't intellectual superiority. It's philosophical immersion that genuinely changes your lived relationship with time. You've thought yourself into a different temporal framework, one where dates matter less than being, where chronology serves no essential function, where your identity isn't dependent on accumulating years, but on how you engage with existence itself. The phenomenology of time, how time feels from inside, varies immensely. Henri Bergson distinguished between temps, measurable clock time, and durée, lived time, duration as experienced. Martin Heidegger wrote about authentic temporality as facing one's finitude rather than fleeing into daily distractions. These aren't just philosophical abstractions. They describe genuine variations in how consciousness structures temporal experience. Some people live inside Bergson's durée, experiencing time through its qualitative flow rather than its measured units. Some people have integrated Heidegger's being toward death so thoroughly that present moments carry their finitude consciously, making future dates feel strangely irrelevant. These aren't better or worse ways of experiencing time. They're different architectures of temporal consciousness. And here's what matters. If your temporal consciousness is structured around qualitative moments, flow states, present awareness, continuous identity, or existential acceptance of life's wholeness, birthdays simply don't fit. They require a different temporal framework, one oriented to increments, progress, chapters, chronological accumulation. They ask you to care about something your consciousness isn't organized to care about. This temporal flexibility points to something even deeper. For people who treat birthdays as ordinary days, we're really asking about their entire meaning-making apparatus. How do they decide what matters? What structure of value allows them to dismiss something culture insists is significant? The answer involves not just how they experience time, but how they construct meaning itself, and whether they construct it at all, or find it, or simply let it arise without the need for external validation. That's the existential territory we enter next. Chapter 6: Existential Psychology and the Problem of Arbitrary Meaning. The absurdist position. Once you recognize that meaning isn't inherent, that it's constructed, assigned, agreed upon rather than discovered, every cultural ritual becomes a choice, including birthdays. Some people make that recognition and continue celebrating anyway, embracing the human project of meaning-making. Others recognize it and withdraw, unable to invest in constructs they've seen through. This is where existential psychology illuminates birthday indifference, not as personality deficit or attachment wound, but as philosophical stance. Albert Camus began with a brutal observation. The universe is indifferent to human meaning. We crave significance, coherence, purpose. The cosmos offers none. This mismatch between our need for meaning and the universe's silence is what Camus called the absurd. We are meaning-seeking creatures in a meaningless universe, and this contradiction defines the human condition. The birthday exemplifies this absurdity perfectly. We've assigned profound significance to the anniversary of our birth. We gather people, we ritualize gratitude. We mark another year as if the universe notices or cares. But it doesn't. The Earth's rotation around the sun has no relationship to human significance. Your birth was a biological event, not a cosmic one. The meaning we attach to its anniversary is entirely invented, a story we tell ourselves to create structure in formless time. For someone who's genuinely internalized the absurdist position, birthday indifference becomes almost inevitable. Why invest emotional energy in celebrating something fundamentally arbitrary? The birthday asks you to pretend that a particular date matters objectively, when you know, with philosophical clarity, that it doesn't. Participating feels like self-deception, like playing along with a collective fiction you've seen through. But here's the crucial nuance. Camus wasn't a nihilist. He distinguished sharply between recognizing meaninglessness and surrendering to despair. His answer to the absurd wasn't suicide or apathy, it was rebellion. Rebellion through living fully, through creating your own meaning in defiance of cosmic indifference, through choosing to find joy and beauty even knowing they're temporary and groundless. So the absurdist might not celebrate birthdays. They're too obviously constructed to feel authentic. But they're not withdrawing from life. They're engaging with it on their own terms, creating meaning through chosen actions rather than inherited rituals. The birthday indifference isn't depression or nihilism. It's selective about which human inventions deserve their limited energy, and arbitrary temporal markers don't make the cut. Constructivist meaning-making. Constructivism takes this further. All meaning is constructed. Nothing has inherent significance. We create meaning through interpretation, through the stories we tell about events, through the value systems we adopt. This isn't relativism claiming all meanings are equal. It's recognition that meaning is a human activity, something we do rather than something we find. Some people engage this construction process consciously. They examine which meaning structures they've inherited versus chosen. They ask, does this ritual actually serve me? Does this belief align with my values? Does this tradition create genuine connection or just performance? They become architects of their own meaning systems rather than passive inheritors of cultural defaults. For these individuals, birthdays often fail to earn inclusion. The meaning-making calculus doesn't work out. What does the birthday actually provide? Social attention that may feel uncomfortable. Temporal marking that doesn't align with how they experience identity. Celebration of existence rather than achievement. which violates their value structure. The birthday wants to be meaningful but can't justify its significance under examination. Viktor Frankl, who survived Nazi concentration camps, developed logotherapy around a central claim. Humans can survive almost anything if they have meaning. But he identified only 3 sources of genuine meaning: creating something valuable, loving someone, or finding meaning in unavoidable suffering. Notice what's absent: temporal markers, social rituals, celebration of mere existence. Frankl would likely say birthdays aren't where meaning lies. Meaning comes from what you contribute, who you love, how you face adversity. Your age is incidental. The anniversary of your birth marks nothing you've done, nothing you've chosen, nothing that reflects your values or choices. It's biographically true, but existentially empty. People who've internalized this framework, whether through Frankl or their own experience, often treat birthdays with benign indifference. They're not hostile to celebration. They're just oriented toward meaning sources that birthdays don't provide. They'd rather spend energy on work that matters, relationships that nourish, challenges that forge character. The birthday becomes irrelevant not because they're damaged, but because there's clarity about where meaning actually lives for them. Essentialism versus existentialism. Here's a fundamental metaphysical divide. Essentialism holds that things have inherent nature, essential qualities that define them. Applied to humans, you have inherent worth simply by existing. You matter because you're human, because you're alive, because existence itself is valuable. The birthday, in this framework, celebrates your inherent essence. You're worthy of celebration simply for being. Existentialism inverts this completely. Jean-Paul Sartre's famous formulation, existence precedes essence. You exist first, as raw fact, and only afterward create your essence through choices and actions. You aren't born with inherent worth. You create worth through how you live. Your value isn't given, it's made. From the existentialist perspective, birthdays are philosophically hollow. They celebrate nothing you've done, nothing you've chosen, nothing that reflects your created essence. Your birthday marks the beginning of existence, the point before you've done anything to define yourself. Celebrating it annually makes no sense if value comes from choices rather than mere being. Existentially oriented people often struggle with birthday celebration for exactly this reason. They can't reconcile the ritual with their deeper metaphysical commitments. If you believe you create your worth through authentic choices, through taking responsibility for your freedom, through the projects you commit to, then what does your birth date have to do with any of that? You didn't choose to be born. You didn't earn your birth. It happened to you. And celebrating it feels like celebrating something that has nothing to do with who you've actually become. This isn't coldness. It's philosophical consistency. The existentialist isn't saying they lack worth. They're saying worth comes from different sources than essentialists believe. And birthdays, which celebrate mere existence, contradict their entire framework of how value gets created. Sartre would go further. Bad faith is pretending you're defined by fixed essence rather than radical freedom. Celebrating your birthday year after year, as if your age determines your identity, might be a form of bad faith. Treating yourself as a thing defined by time rather than as freedom continuously creating itself. The person who treats their birthday as a normal day might, from this angle, be living more authentically than the person who performs annual celebration of their temporal position. The hedonic treadmill and adaptation. Psychology offers a less philosophical but equally powerful explanation: hedonic adaptation. Brickman and Campbell's research demonstrated that humans return to baseline happiness levels regardless of positive or negative events. We adapt. The lottery winner returns to their previous happiness. The paraplegic adjusts and finds new equilibrium. We're remarkably efficient at normalizing whatever happens. This applies to birthdays with particular force. Your 40th birthday, objectively the same experience as your 39th in terms of how you feel, your capabilities, your daily life. You're one day older than yesterday. Nothing fundamental has changed. Yet the culture insists this particular birthday should feel significant, should be marked with greater celebration, should register as different from the years surrounding it. Some people consciously recognize this absurdity and refuse it. They've noticed that special occasions lose potency through repetition. The first birthday you truly cared about felt magical. The second, slightly less so. By your 30th or 40th, you've performed this ritual so many times that novelty is impossible. You know exactly what happens. Cake, candles, people singing awkwardly, gifts you may not want, performing gratitude. The hedonic reward has diminished to near zero through pure repetition. The psychologically aware response. Step off the treadmill entirely. Stop pretending this year's birthday will feel different from last year's. Stop investing energy in generating enthusiasm for an event you've already experienced dozens of times. Accept that birthdays have adapted out of significance through sheer frequency and decline to participate in the collective pretense otherwise. This isn't cynicism. It's clear-eyed recognition of how the human reward system actually functions. We're designed to habituate, to normalize, to seek novelty. Annual repetition of the same ritual defeats this design. The people who continue finding birthdays meaningful either genuinely resist hedonic adaptation, rare, or are performing enthusiasm they don't fully feel, common. Those who treat birthdays as normal days have simply stopped performing. Mortality salience and terror management. Terror management theory, developed by Greenberg, Solomon, and Pyszczynski, begins with a dark truth. Humans are uniquely cursed with awareness of their own mortality. We know we'll die. This knowledge creates existential terror that we spend our lives managing through cultural worldviews and self-esteem projects that promise symbolic immortality. Birthdays trigger mortality salience. Each one is a step closer to death. You're not getting younger. Time is running out. The birthday that supposedly celebrates life simultaneously reminds you that life is finite, that you're aging toward non-existence, that the years are accumulating in the wrong direction. People respond to this mortality reminder in predictable ways. Some amplify celebration, throwing bigger parties, taking elaborate trips, gathering more witnesses to their continued vitality. This is terror management through symbolic immortality projects. The celebration proves you're still alive, still accumulating experiences, still important enough for people to gather around you. Others respond with acceptance or indifference. They've made peace with mortality. They don't need cultural anxiety buffers. They're comfortable enough with their finitude that birthdays, which highlight it, don't require defensive celebration. They can acknowledge another year passing without needing to ritualize their continued existence or defend against death awareness. Martin Heidegger wrote about being toward death, living authentically by acknowledging mortality rather than fleeing it through distraction. From this perspective, birthday indifference might reflect greater existential maturity than celebration. You're not using ritual to buffer death anxiety because you've integrated death awareness into your daily consciousness. You don't need one day per year to confront aging because you face it continuously. The people most comfortable with birthday indifference often have this quality. They've looked at mortality directly and aren't afraid. They don't need symbolic immortality projects, legacy building, cultural engagement, celebration rituals, because they're not running from death. They've accepted it, made peace with it, integrated it into their understanding of what it means to be human. The birthday becomes unnecessary because they're not using it to manage existential terror they no longer feel. Michael Steger's research on meaning in life, measured through his Meaning in Life questionnaire, shows something relevant. People with high presence of meaning, experiencing their current life as meaningful, are less dependent on external validation or cultural rituals for well-being. They've found or created meaning that sustains them independent of temporal markers. Viktor Frankl called the absence of meaning the existential vacuum, a sense of emptiness, purposelessness, that drives people toward distraction and conformity. Birthday celebration can be one such distraction, filling the vacuum with ritual because nothing more substantial is available. But people who've filled the vacuum with genuine meaning, through work, relationships, values, spiritual practice, don't need the distraction. The birthday is just another day because their days are already sufficiently meaningful. This is the existential substrate beneath birthday indifference for many people. They've engaged the fundamental questions. Why am I here? What matters? How should I live knowing I'll die? And their answers don't include celebrate annual temporal markers. They've constructed or discovered meaning elsewhere, and birthdays simply don't serve their existential needs. These philosophical frameworks aren't just abstract. They live in actual human consciousness, shaping how people experience everything, including birthdays. But philosophy doesn't float free of biology. These existential stances, comfort with mortality, conscious meaning-making, resistance to arbitrary constructs, have neurological correlates. They happen in brains, in specific neural networks that process anticipation, reward, and social validation. That's where we turn next, to the biological mechanisms that make some nervous systems simply less responsive to the whole apparatus of anticipated celebration. Chapter 7. Neuroscience of Anticipation and Reward. The dopaminergic anticipation circuit. Philosophy and personality create predispositions, but ultimately, everything we experience happens in the brain. Birthday indifference isn't just psychological stance or cultural critique. It has neurological architecture. Some brains simply process anticipated celebration differently. Reward systems that respond weakly to social validation, neural networks that don't privilege self-focused attention. This isn't dysfunction. It's variation in how the biological machinery of meaning operates. Deep in the midbrain sits the ventral tegmental area, a cluster of dopamine-producing neurons that project forward to the nucleus accumbens and prefrontal cortex. This is your brain's anticipation circuit, the system that generates wanting, motivation, the sense that something rewarding approaches. When you anticipate pleasure, food, sex, social connection, achievement, this circuit activates. The dopamine surge isn't the reward itself. It's the neural signature of expecting reward. Here's what matters. This system varies dramatically between individuals. Some people have highly responsive dopaminergic circuits. Anticipation floods them with motivation and excitement. The promise of a birthday party, social connection, celebration, attention, lights up their reward circuitry days in advance. They experience genuine neural pleasure from merely anticipating the event. Others have naturally lower dopaminergic responsiveness. Their ventral tegmental area doesn't surge as dramatically in response to anticipated social rewards. When their birthday approaches, the neural circuitry that should generate excitement remains relatively quiet. They're not depressed. Their baseline dopamine function is fine. They're simply temperamentally less responsive to this particular class of anticipated reward. This is crucial to understand. Low reward sensitivity to social celebration isn't pathology. It's constitutional difference, likely genetic, evident from early childhood. Jerome Kagan's longitudinal research on temperament showed that some infants respond more strongly to novel stimuli. Others barely react, and these differences persist across the lifespan. The infant who doesn't startle easily often becomes the adult whose reward circuitry doesn't spike for anticipated parties. For these individuals, birthdays fail to generate anticipatory pleasure because their dopaminergic circuits aren't wired to respond strongly to social celebratory cues. The birthday approaches and their brain just doesn't care. Not because something's wrong, but because that's how their particular nervous system functions. They might experience robust dopamine responses to other anticipated rewards, intellectual challenge, creative breakthrough, solitary achievement. But social celebration doesn't activate the circuit. This explains why some people report genuinely not understanding what others find exciting about birthdays. It's not affectation or contrarianism. It's neurological reality. Their brain isn't generating the anticipatory reward signal that makes waiting for your birthday feel exciting. The biological mechanism that should make celebration appealing simply isn't activating. The default mode network and self-referential processing. The default mode network, that constellation of brain regions including the medial prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex, and temporal poles, activates when you're not focused on external tasks. It's your brain's idle state. And what it does during idling is fascinating. It thinks about you. Self-referential processing, Autobiographical memory, imagining your future, wondering what others think of you. This is default mode network activity. Individual differences in default mode network function are substantial. Some people have very active DMNs. Their resting brain constantly generates self-focused thoughts. They spend significant mental energy on their identity, their social position, their past, and future selves. Others have quieter DMNs. Their resting brain doesn't default to self-focus as readily. They spend less time thinking about themselves as objects of others' attention. Birthdays require robust default mode network engagement. The entire event is structured around self-focus. It's my day. I'm being celebrated. People are thinking about me. This requires you to activate the medial prefrontal cortex, to engage in self-referential processing, to maintain sustained attention on yourself as the object of others' regard. For people with less active default mode networks, this feels unnatural, even uncomfortable. Their brain doesn't spontaneously generate self-focused content. Forcing it to do so for birthday celebration creates cognitive effort rather than pleasure. They're swimming against their neural current, trying to care about something their brain isn't designed to prioritize. Research on long-term meditation practitioners shows reduced default mode network activation. They've literally changed their brain's resting state through practice, quieting self-referential thought. These individuals often report decreased interest in birthdays and other self-celebratory events, not as philosophical choice, but as natural consequence of altered neural functioning. When your brain spends less time thinking about me as a concept, events celebrating me lose relevance. This isn't narcissism deficiency. It's not lacking self-esteem. It's having a brain that doesn't privilege self as object thinking. These people often have perfectly healthy self-worth. They simply don't spend neural resources on self-focused cognition. The birthday, which demands exactly that cognition, feels like being asked to use muscles they haven't developed. Memory consolidation and special events. The amygdala, that almond-shaped structure deep in the temporal lobe, serves as your brain's emotional amplifier. When something triggers strong emotion, fear, joy, excitement, surprise, the amygdala activates and signals to the hippocampus. This matters, remember it. This is why emotional events become vivid memories while routine days fade quickly. The amygdala hippocampal circuit preferentially encodes emotionally arousing experiences. Birthdays become memorable through this mechanism. The emotional arousal of celebration, people singing to you, gifts, social attention, triggers amygdala activation. The novelty and emotional intensity signal the memory system that this experience deserves storage. Years later, you remember birthday parties because your amygdala said they mattered. But amygdala responsiveness varies. Some people have highly reactive amygdalae, responding intensely to emotional stimuli. Others have dampened emotional reactivity, not depression, not trauma, just constitutional difference. Their amygdala doesn't surge as dramatically in response to social celebratory situations. For these individuals, birthdays don't encode as special. The emotional arousal that should signal, remember this, doesn't materialize. Their birthday passes and their brain treats it like any other day because, neurologically, it was like any other day. The amygdala didn't activate sufficiently to mark it as significant. The memory consolidation system didn't prioritize it. This creates the phenomenological experience of it's just another day. That's not cognitive distortion or emotional suppression. It's accurate reporting of their neural experience. Their brain genuinely processed the birthday as non-special because the emotional circuitry that should differentiate special from ordinary didn't activate. Over time, this reinforces birthday indifference. If your past birthdays aren't stored as emotionally significant memories, you have no neural basis for anticipating future birthdays as significant. The feedback loop is self-sustaining. Dampened emotional response leads to weak memory encoding, leads to low anticipatory activation, leads to continued dampened response. The social brain, temporal parietal junction. The temporal parietal junction, where the temporal and parietal lobes meet, is central to mentalizing, that capacity to think about what others are thinking. Theory of mind, perspective taking, understanding that others have mental states different from your own. These cognitive abilities rely heavily on TPJ function. Birthdays involve extraordinary amounts of mentalizing. The entire event is structured around others thinking about you. They're planning for you, choosing gifts for you, gathering to celebrate you, thinking thoughts about your importance to them. To fully engage with this, you need active TPJ function. You need to represent in your mind that others are representing you in their minds. Individual differences in TPJ responsiveness are substantial. Some people have highly active TPJs. They naturally and constantly engage in mentalizing. They're always tracking what others might be thinking, how others perceive them, what's happening in others' minds regarding themselves. These people often love birthdays because the event explicitly enacts what their TPJ is always doing anyway. Others have less responsive TPJs. They don't spontaneously mentalize as much. They're less attuned to others' mental states about them. They can do it when necessary, but it's not their default cognitive mode. For these individuals, birthdays can feel strange. The event requires sustained attention to others' thoughts about you, but their TPJ isn't generating that content automatically. Rebecca Sachs's research on TPJ function shows it's not binary. It's a continuum. At one end, people constantly track others' mental states. At the other end, people are neurologically less oriented to social cognition. Birthday celebration serves the former group beautifully. For the latter, it's asking their brain to do something it's not optimized for. This connects to autism spectrum research, though we must be careful here. Autistic individuals often report difficulty understanding why birthdays matter, sometimes experiencing them as confusing social obligations. This isn't because they lack emotion or don't appreciate connection. It's partly because their TPJ and broader social cognition networks function differently. They're less automatically attuned to others' thoughts about them. The birthday's implicit structure, others are thinking about you, and you should care about this, doesn't align with how their social brain processes information. Even in neurotypical populations, TPJ responsiveness varies enough to explain birthday indifference. If your brain isn't strongly oriented toward tracking others' attention and mental states regarding you, then an event structured entirely around that dynamic won't feel rewarding. It'll feel irrelevant or even exhausting. All this social cognition work for a reward your brain doesn't particularly value. The prefrontal cortex and abstract time. The prefrontal cortex, particularly the dorsolateral regions, handles abstract thought, planning, and temporal reasoning. When you think about future events, when you plan across days and weeks, when you understand your birthday as an upcoming milestone, that's prefrontal cortex activity. Some people have strong prefrontal engagement with future time. They live partly in the future mentally, planning, anticipating, representing upcoming events with vivid detail. For these individuals, an approaching birthday exists vividly in their mental landscape weeks in advance. The prefrontal cortex keeps it active, keeps generating thoughts about it, keeps it salient. Others have neural patterns more strongly weighted toward present moment processing. Their prefrontal cortex doesn't engage as heavily in future-focused cognition. They live more fully in the current moment, less in mental simulation of upcoming events. Tomorrow's birthday doesn't occupy much neural real estate today because their brain isn't spending prefrontal resources on future representation. Mindfulness meditation demonstrably changes prefrontal activation patterns. Practitioners show reduced activity in brain regions associated with mind-wandering and future thinking, increased activity in areas linked to present moment awareness. Long-term meditators often report that birthdays and other future events simply don't capture their attention the way they once did. Their brain has been trained to privilege now over later. This isn't cognitive impairment. It's cognitive redistribution. The prefrontal resources that might have gone toward anticipating birthdays now go toward deeper present moment engagement. The birthday still occurs, but it doesn't dominate consciousness beforehand because the brain isn't building elaborate future representations of it. For these individuals, just today genuinely matters more than annual today. The actual day when it arrives receives full attention. But the abstract concept of my birthday in 2 weeks doesn't activate much neural processing. The prefrontal cortex isn't generating it, isn't keeping it alive in working memory, isn't using it as an organizing temporal landmark. All of these neural differences, reward circuitry responsiveness, default mode network activity, emotional encoding strength, mentalizing capacity, temporal abstraction patterns, aren't deficits. They're variations in how human brains can be configured. Kagan's temperament research demonstrated that these differences emerge early and remain stable. You don't choose your dopaminergic sensitivity. You don't decide how active your default mode network will be. These are biological givens, the neural hardware you inherit or develop through early experience. Birthday indifference, for many people, has this neurological substrate. Their brains are built or trained in ways that don't support the cognitive and emotional processes birthday celebration requires. They're not resisting culture or performing indifference. Their actual neural machinery processes birthdays differently, and that machinery doesn't flag birthdays as particularly significant events. But these brains don't exist in isolation. They develop in culture, respond to culture, sometimes resist culture. And contemporary culture presents a particular challenge. We're saturated with performative celebration, social media birthday performances, mandatory public joy. Meanwhile, we're simultaneously developing greater skepticism about authenticity, about whether any of this performance reflects genuine connection. This creates a strange landscape where birthday indifference can be both biological reality and cultural critique, and sometimes it's both at once. Chapter 8. The Performance of Joy and Authenticity Fatigue. Irving Goffman's Dramaturgical Theory. Sociologist Irving Goffman proposed in the 1950s that social life operates like theater. We're all performing, all the time, managing the impressions we make on others. He distinguished between front stage, where we perform our social roles for audiences, and backstage, where we drop the performance and exist without audience management. Front stage requires effort. You monitor your behavior, choose your words carefully, present the version of yourself appropriate to the situation. You're the professional at work, the dutiful child at family dinner, the supportive friend at someone's crisis. These aren't lies, but they're curated presentations, edited versions of your full self. Backstage is where you stop performing. You're alone or with people safe enough that impression management becomes unnecessary. You can be tired, cranky, contradictory, unfiltered. The performance ends. The relief can be profound. Birthdays are quintessentially front-stage events. You're the central performer with a very specific role. The birthday person who is delighted to be celebrated, grateful for attention, gracious about gifts, enthusiastic about the whole production. Even if you're tired, even if you didn't want to party, even if you'd rather be reading a book. The role exists independent of your actual feelings, and you're expected to perform it convincingly. This creates exhaustion that accumulates over years. Every birthday requires you to go front stage, to activate the performance, to manage impressions for hours while people watch specifically to see if you're properly delighted. You're being evaluated on your performance of birthday joy. Are you grateful enough? Surprised enough? Appropriately moved? For some people, the cumulative exhaustion of this performance becomes unbearable. They recognize they're performing emotions they don't authentically feel, and continuing feels like betraying themselves. The solution becomes rejecting the role entirely. If you treat your birthday as a normal day, you don't have to perform. You can stay backstage. You can be your unfiltered self without the burden of matching others' expectations of how a birthday person should behave. This isn't antisocial or ungrateful. It's refusing to perform when the performance costs more than it provides. Goffman himself noted that constant front-stage presence drains psychological resources. We need backstage time to maintain coherence. For some people, birthdays became too front-stage, too performative, too distant from authentic feeling. Opting out becomes self-preservation. Emotional labor and celebration. Arlie Hochschild coined emotional labor to describe the work of managing your feelings to produce appropriate outward effect, particularly in service roles. Flight attendants must appear cheerful. Nurses must seem caring. Bill collectors must convey authority. The emotion you actually feel becomes irrelevant. What matters is projecting the emotion the role requires. Hochschild focused on paid work, but emotional labor extends everywhere. Birthdays demand enormous emotional labor, particularly from the birthday person. You must generate or simulate gratitude for gifts you may not want, joy at attention you may not enjoy, surprise at a party you knew was coming, warmth toward people you may not feel close to, enthusiasm about plans someone else made. This is work, real cognitive and emotional work. You're monitoring your facial expressions, modulating your voice, ensuring your body language conveys the appropriate effect. You're suppressing irritation, boredom, discomfort, fatigue, whatever you actually feel, and projecting the birthday emotion others expect to see. Women face this burden disproportionately. Socialization trains women to perform emotional availability, to manage others' feelings, to ensure everyone around them feels comfortable and appreciated. At their own birthday, many women find themselves doing emotional labor to make their guests feel good about celebrating them. They're thanking people profusely, reassuring everyone their gift was perfect, making sure no one feels awkward or unwanted. The birthday becomes another occasion for caretaking others' emotions rather than genuinely receiving care. Opting out of birthday celebration can be an act of refusing emotional labor. Finally, a day you don't have to manage anyone's feelings about you. You don't have to perform gratitude or joy. You don't have to reassure your mother that yes, you loved the sweater, it was exactly what you wanted. You don't have to make your friends feel their party planning was worth it. You can simply exist without the performance requirement. This connects to broader discussions of women's unpaid labor, emotional and otherwise. The birthday is supposedly for you, but if you're spending it doing emotional labor to manage everyone else's experience of celebrating you, who is it really serving? Some women reach a point where they recognize this dynamic and simply decline to participate. It's not ingratitude. It's exhaustion at being expected to perform appreciation for something that creates more work than joy. Social media and performative authenticity. Then came Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and birthdays transformed into content. The celebration isn't just for the people physically present. It's for the audience, the followers, the networked observers who will judge the aesthetic quality and emotional authenticity of your birthday performance. The Instagramification of birthdays created new labor. Now you must not only have a birthday celebration, but document it properly. The right photos, the right captions, the right balance of humility and joy. Too much enthusiasm looks narcissistic. Too little looks ungrateful. The performance becomes meta-performance, performing both the celebration and the documentation of the celebration for different audiences with different expectations. This created what we might call performative authenticity, the exhausting work of appearing authentic while performing. Your birthday post must seem spontaneous while being carefully curated. It must feel genuine while serving audience expectations. You're performing authenticity, which is perhaps the most draining performance of all, because it requires pretending you're not performing. Digital natives, people who grew up with social media, often see through this performance earlier and more clearly than older generations. They've watched thousands of birthday posts. They recognize the patterns, the staged spontaneity, the performative surprise, the aesthetic conventions that signal, "This is my authentic birthday joy." They've seen the machinery of performed authenticity so many times that participating in it feels absurd. Some withdraw entirely. They don't post about their birthday. They don't announce it. They certainly don't stage photos of themselves with cake. This isn't modesty or privacy exactly. It's refusal to participate in a performance they've recognized as performance. The authenticity has drained out through repetition and awareness, and continuing feels like contributing to something hollow. There's an uncanny valley effect with birthday posts. You know the person is performing. They know they're performing. They know they're performing. But everyone maintains the fiction that this is genuine, spontaneous joy being shared. The disconnect between the performance and its frame as authentic creates cognitive dissonance that some people resolve by opting out entirely. Brené Brown and vulnerability hangovers. Brené Brown's research on vulnerability introduced the concept of the vulnerability hangover, that shame or regret that follows allowing yourself to be seen, to be emotionally exposed. You share something true and afterward feel raw, overexposed, wishing you could take it back. Birthdays create structural vulnerability. You're the center of attention. People are looking at you, talking about you, making claims about your importance to them. You're receiving expressions of affection and care. For some people, this level of visibility and emotional exposure feels dangerous, even when the context is ostensibly positive. The vulnerability comes from being seen as someone worthy of celebration. This requires accepting, at least performatively, that you matter, that your existence is valuable enough to mark that people genuinely care about you. For people with insecure attachment, low self-worth, or histories of disappointment, this acceptance creates intense discomfort. The birthday forces you into vulnerability without guaranteeing sufficient relational safety. Your coworkers singing to you doesn't mean they actually care deeply. Your family throwing a party doesn't mean the relationships are secure. The performance of celebration can happen without genuine intimacy, and being celebrated by people you're not truly close to creates a particular kind of vulnerability. You're exposed without the safety that should accompany exposure. The vulnerability hangover after birthdays can be severe. You spent the day accepting attention and care, and afterward you wonder, did they really mean it? Did I deserve it? Was I performing gratitude for something hollow? Did I reveal my neediness by accepting their celebration? The discomfort lingers for days. For some people, the solution becomes avoiding the vulnerability entirely. If you treat your birthday as a normal day, you don't have to be vulnerable. You don't have to accept claims that you're special or worthy of attention. You don't have to risk the hangover. You can maintain your protective distance, your defense against being seen and potentially disappointed. This isn't strength exactly, it's self-protection. The birthday's vulnerability feels too risky, so you decline the entire transaction. You'd rather have no celebration than risk the emotional exposure it requires. This makes sense given certain histories, even if it also maintains isolation. The paradox of choice and celebration fatigue. Barry Schwartz's research on the paradox of choice revealed something counterintuitive. More options often decrease satisfaction. When you have too many choices, decision-making becomes exhausting, and you're less happy with whatever you eventually choose because you're haunted by all the options you didn't select. Modern birthday celebration involves overwhelming choice. What kind of celebration? Dinner with friends? Quiet day alone? Weekend trip? Big party? Small gathering? What kind of food? What activities? Who to invite? How to communicate preferences without seeming demanding. The options multiply until the planning itself becomes burdensome. Then there's gift navigation. What do you want? Are you supposed to have a wish list? Is that presumptuous? If people ask what you want and you say nothing, will they feel awkward? If you suggest things, are you being materialistic? The social choreography around birthday gifts creates decision fatigue even when you're supposedly the beneficiary. For some people, the path of least resistance becomes treating it as a normal day. No decisions to make. No preferences to communicate. No coordination required. No risk of disappointing people with wrong choices or seeming ungrateful for choices they made. The cognitive load drops to zero. You just continue your life without adding celebration complexity to it. This connects to minimalism's broader appeal. We live in a culture of excess. Excess consumption, excess stimulation, excess obligation. Birthdays are excess crystallized. Excess attention, excess gifts, excess food, excess emotional performance. The minimalist response is subtraction. Remove the excess. Return to simplicity. Let the day be what it is without adding celebratory layers that complicate rather than enrich. This isn't always about preference. Sometimes it's about capacity. Some people lack the emotional or cognitive resources to navigate birthday complexity. They're managing mental health challenges, or demanding jobs, or family crises. Adding birthday celebration to that load becomes untenable. Treating it as normal day preserves limited resources for what actually requires them. The authenticity crisis underlying all of this runs deep. We're living through a cultural moment of profound skepticism about institutional rituals, inherited traditions, prescribed ways of being. We question religion, national celebrations, gendered expectations, family obligations, everything. Birthdays are just one more ritual under scrutiny. Some people interrogate birthday celebration and conclude it fails the authenticity test. It's performed joy rather than genuine. It's obligation disguised as gift. It's commercialized intimacy replacing actual connection. Late capitalism has colonized even this supposedly personal celebration, turning it into another consumption event, another content opportunity, another performance venue. The response, for some, is withdrawal. If birthdays have become performances divorced from authentic feeling, if emotional labor has replaced genuine joy, if social media has transformed celebration into content, if vulnerability comes without safety, if choices overwhelm rather than liberate, then perhaps the most authentic choice is opting out entirely. This isn't passive indifference. It's active refusal. It's saying, I see the performance you're asking me to participate in, and I decline. I see the emotional labor you're expecting, and I won't provide it. I see the authenticity you're faking, and I won't fake it with you. I'd rather have nothing than participate in something hollow. This performative exhaustion connects to a broader cultural movement. The intentional simplification of life, the pruning of excess obligations, the focus on what genuinely nourishes rather than what merely looks good. For some, birthday indifference isn't isolated. It's part of a larger project of living with less performance, less consumption, less cultural conformity. That's the territory we explore next. How birthday indifference can be an expression of minimalist, anti-consumerist values, a small rebellion against the cultural mandate to mark, celebrate, and consume every temporal milestone. Chapter 9: Countercultural Movements and Intentional Non-Celebration. Minimalism and the Rejection of Excess. Not all birthday indifference is passive. Sometimes it's a deliberate practice, a conscious alignment with values that reject cultural excess. For some people, treating their birthday as a normal day isn't about lack of feeling. It's about philosophical conviction. They've examined the assumptions underneath birthday celebration and found them incompatible with how they've chosen to live. This is birthday indifference as intentional practice, as countercultural stance, as quiet rebellion against the consumerist machinery of modern life. The minimalist movement asks a deceptively simple question: what do you actually need? Strip away the accumulated stuff, the obligations, the complexity that clutters life without enriching it. Keep only what serves you. Release everything else. This isn't asceticism for its own sake. It's intentional curation, creating space for what genuinely matters by removing what doesn't. Apply this lens to birthdays and something becomes visible: they're consumption events. Gifts accumulate, things you didn't need, often didn't want, that now require storage and maintenance. Parties generate waste, decorations, wrapping paper, single-use plates, food excess. The celebration itself consumes time, energy, social capital. The apparatus of birthday celebration is fundamentally about accumulation. For committed minimalists, this creates irreconcilable conflict. They've spent months or years removing excess from their lives, declining the cultural imperative to accumulate. Then comes their birthday, and suddenly everyone wants to give them things, to add complexity, to celebrate through consumption. The gift-giving feels like it violates the very values they're trying to live by. The minimalist response is often to treat the birthday as a normal day. No party means no waste. No gift expectations means no unwanted accumulation. The day passes simply, without adding material or social complexity to their life. This isn't deprivation, it's consistency. They're applying their values uniformly rather than making exceptions for cultural tradition. Marie Kondo's framework offers a useful test. Does celebrating spark joy? For minimalists, the honest answer is often no. The planning doesn't spark joy, it sparks anxiety. The gifts don't spark joy, they spark obligation and clutter. The performance doesn't spark joy, it sparks exhaustion. The only honest response becomes thanking the tradition for its service and letting it go. This can create social friction. Family and friends interpret non-celebration as rejection, as ingratitude, as concerning behavior. They don't understand that it's values alignment, not psychological deficit. The minimalist has to either explain repeatedly, creating its own complexity, or accept being misunderstood. Many choose the latter. Quiet non-celebration becomes easier than perpetual explanation. Stoic philosophy and equanimity. Ancient Stoicism, experiencing remarkable contemporary revival, offers another framework for birthday indifference. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca. These philosophers taught radical acceptance of what you cannot control and indifference to external circumstances. The goal was equanimity, remaining unmoved by fortune or misfortune, maintaining internal stability regardless of external events. The Stoics categorized everything into what's up to us, our judgments, reactions, character, and what's not up to us, nearly everything else. Externals, wealth, reputation, others' opinions, circumstances, were classified as preferred indifference. Nice if you have them, but irrelevant to virtue and therefore to genuine well-being. Birthdays fit squarely in this category. Whether people celebrate you is not up to you. Whether you receive gifts, attention, parties, all external, all beyond your control. The Stoic response isn't to desire these things or to organize your happiness around their presence or absence. It's to cultivate indifference. If celebration happens, fine. If not, equally fine. Your inner state remains undisturbed either way. Modern Stoics, and there are many, from tech workers to military personnel, finding ancient philosophy newly relevant, often actively cultivate birthday indifference as practice. They're training themselves to not need external validation, to not depend on others' recognition, to find stability within rather than through circumstances. The birthday becomes an annual test. Can I remain equanimous? Can I genuinely not care whether anyone remembers or celebrates? This isn't cold-heartedness. Stoics value relationships deeply, but they distinguish between appreciating connection and needing validation. You can love someone without requiring them to perform annual celebration of your existence. The relationship's quality doesn't depend on birthday acknowledgement. To think otherwise is to make your happiness hostage to externals, which Stoic philosophy considers a fundamental error. The Stoic might say, I prefer celebration to non-celebration, all else equal. But all else is rarely equal, and my well-being doesn't depend on it. Therefore, I'll invest no emotional energy in whether my birthday gets recognized. If it does, I'll appreciate it lightly. If it doesn't, I'll notice no disturbance. This is birthday indifference as philosophical achievement, as evidence of internal strength rather than social disconnection. Buddhist non-attachment. Buddhism approaches similar terrain through different language. The second noble truth identifies attachment, tanha, or craving, as the root of suffering. We suffer because we cling to things being certain ways. We want pleasure to continue, pain to stop, circumstances to match our preferences. This clinging creates suffering because impermanence is reality's fundamental nature. Everything changes. Nothing lasts. Clinging to what changes inevitably brings disappointment. Birthday celebration involves multiple attachments. Attachment to being remembered. Attachment to receiving appropriate recognition. Attachment to others caring enough to celebrate you. Attachment to feeling special, valued, important, at least for one day. Each attachment is a potential source of suffering. If people forget, if the celebration disappoints, if you feel under-recognized, you suffer because you were attached to a particular outcome. The Buddhist response isn't to avoid birthdays, but to release attachment to how they unfold. The middle way applies here as everywhere, neither clinging to celebration nor rejecting it, but holding it lightly, allowing it to be whatever it is without requiring it to be something specific. Treating your birthday as a normal day can be an expression of this non-attachment. You're not invested in it being special. You're not clinging to particular outcomes. It's just another day in the flow of impermanent days. This requires distinguishing between healthy preference and attachment. You might prefer celebration, that's fine. But if the preference becomes need, if your happiness depends on it, If disappointment arises when it doesn't happen, you've crossed into attachment. The practice becomes noticing when preference becomes clinging and releasing the grip. Long-term meditation practitioners often report diminished investment in birthdays not because they're depressed, but because they've genuinely reduced attachment. They've experienced directly, through thousands of hours observing their minds, that clinging creates suffering. They've seen how building identity around being celebrated creates vulnerability. The release of attachment brings relief, not loss. The birthday becomes just another day, and that simplicity feels like freedom. Anti-consumerism and cultural critique. For some, birthday indifference is explicitly political. They see birthdays as capitalist constructs designed to drive consumption. Hallmark invented the modern birthday card industry. Retailers created elaborate gift-giving expectations. Restaurants and entertainment venues profit from birthday celebrations. The entire apparatus exists partly to extract money from social obligation. Anti-consumerist movements, from Adbusters to various anarchist collectives to simple living advocates, practice cultural resistance through non-participation. They refuse to be nodes in the consumption network. They won't buy greeting cards that profit corporations while replacing genuine expression. They won't purchase gifts that drive extractive supply chains and environmental destruction. They won't participate in celebrations that exist primarily to move product. This is culture jamming applied to ritual. Culture jamming disrupts commercial messages, reveals the machinery of manipulation, refuses participation in systems that commodify human experience. Not celebrating birthdays becomes a form of this resistance. You're declining to let capitalism colonize another aspect of human connection. You're refusing to perform consumption as love. The political dimension matters. When birthday indifference becomes activism, it's making a statement about values, about what deserves to be purchased and performed. It's saying that genuine connection shouldn't require commercial mediation, that relationships can flourish without annual consumption rituals, that meaning doesn't need to be bought. This can look identical to other forms of birthday indifference from the outside, but internally, it's different. It's conscious refusal rather than passive indifference. It's aligned with broader commitments to anti-capitalism, environmental sustainability, resistance to corporate control of culture. The birthday becomes one more site of resistance in a life organized around different values than mainstream culture prescribes. The voluntary simplicity movement. Dwayne Elgin's work on voluntary simplicity in the 1980s described people consciously choosing to live with less. Less consumption, less complexity, less striving, to create space for what they deemed genuinely meaningful. This wasn't poverty or deprivation. It was intentional lifestyle design organized around values rather than cultural defaults. Voluntary simplicity practitioners reduce social obligations to preserve time and energy for depth. They'd rather have 3 deep friendships than 30 superficial ones. They'd rather spend quiet evenings reading than attending parties they don't enjoy. They're ruthlessly selective about where their limited resources go. In this framework, birthdays often get classified as noise rather than signal. They're social obligations that consume resources, time, energy, money, attention, without providing proportional meaning. The birthday party requires hours of planning, hosting, recovering. The gift exchange requires shopping, wrapping, performing gratitude. For what? One evening of social performance that may or may not generate genuine connection. The voluntary simplicity response is often to decline entirely. Not every year needs marking. Not every relationship needs annual ritual reinforcement. Quality relationships persist through everyday presence, through genuine attention when together, through mutual care that doesn't require scheduled performance. The birthday becomes extraneous when those deeper relational rhythms are intact. This connects to environmental consciousness in important ways. Birthday celebrations generate significant environmental impact. Materials consumed, waste created, resources spent on single-use decorations, and excess food. For people trying to minimize their ecological footprint, birthdays can feel ethically problematic. The celebration requires consumption that violates environmental commitments. The overlap with personality types is notable. These countercultural movements, minimalism, stoicism, Buddhism, anti-consumerism, voluntary simplicity, tend to attract people high in openness, willing to question convention, and conscientiousness, capable of maintaining disciplined practice. They're often introverts who don't derive energy from social celebration. They're frequently people with internal locus of control who don't need external validation. The philosophies and the temperaments reinforce each other. There's a risk worth naming: spiritual bypassing. This term describes using spiritual concepts to avoid dealing with psychological wounds. Someone might claim Buddhist non-attachment to birthdays when they're actually avoiding vulnerability around whether people care about them. They might frame birthday indifference as stoic practice when it's really defense against disappointment. They might call it minimalism when it's depression draining joy from life. The distinction matters. Genuine practice emerges from values and generates freedom. Spiritual bypassing emerges from fear and maintains limitation. How do you tell the difference? Genuine practice feels spacious, chosen, aligned with how you actually live. Bypassing feels defended, rigid, disconnected from other areas of life. If someone lives simply across all domains and treats their birthday consistently with that simplicity, that's probably genuine. If they specifically avoid birthday celebration while otherwise seeking validation and attention, that's probably bypassing. These intentional philosophies show us that birthday indifference can be active choice rather than passive trait. It can be the outcome of examined life, of values consciously adopted and consistently applied. For these individuals, not celebrating isn't about what's wrong with them. It's about what's right with their value system. They've looked at cultural expectations and decided those expectations don't serve them. This is countercultural in the truest sense. The dominant culture says birthdays matter, must be celebrated, deserve investment. These movements say, we disagree. We've examined that claim and found it wanting. We're choosing differently, living differently, relating to time and ritual and meaning differently than we've been told we should. But birthday indifference isn't always this intentional, this values aligned, this philosophically grounded. Sometimes it signals something darker. Not countercultural choice, but psychological struggle. Not examined values, but depression or trauma. That's the shadow territory we must explore next. When birthday disinterest isn't philosophical consistency, but clinical concern. When indifference crosses from healthy independence into isolation that causes suffering. Chapter 10: Clinical Considerations. When indifference signals suffering. Depression and anhedonia. We've explored birthday indifference through many lenses: personality, attachment, philosophy, neuroscience, cultural critique. But there's a shadow side we must acknowledge with care and precision. Sometimes birthday indifference isn't temperament or values. Sometimes it's a symptom, a signal that something has gone wrong in the machinery of emotional life. The line between healthy independence and clinical distress can be subtle, but it matters enormously. One is a way of being in the world. The other is suffering that deserves attention. Major depressive disorder has a core feature that matters here: anhedonia. The loss of pleasure or interest in activities that once brought joy. Not disinterest in new things, that's normal. But the erosion of pleasure in what you previously loved. Food tastes like cardboard. Music sounds like noise. Relationships feel burdensome. Everything flattens into gray sameness. Birthday indifference can be a symptom of this broader anhedonia. If you previously enjoyed birthday celebrations, looked forward to them, felt genuine pleasure in gathering with people, and that enjoyment has disappeared, that's clinically significant. The change matters more than the current state. Depression doesn't usually create completely new patterns. It drains existing ones of their vitality. The phenomenological difference is crucial. Temperamental indifference says, I don't care about birthdays. They don't interest me. I'd rather spend the day differently. This is preference, stable across time, consistent with personality. Clinical anhedonia says, I can't care about birthdays. I know I should feel something. I remember feeling something. But now there's just emptiness where feeling should be. I don't care versus I can't care. The first is choice. The second is loss. The first feels like freedom. The second feels like something's broken. People with temperamental indifference aren't distressed by not celebrating. People with depression often are. They're aware something's missing, confused by their own flatness, sometimes frightened by the absence of feeling. How do you distinguish them? Context matters enormously. If birthday indifference is long-standing, consistent with how you've always been, accompanied by satisfaction in other areas of life, that's temperament. If it's recent, represents a change from previous patterns, occurs alongside other symptoms like sleep disturbance, appetite changes, concentration difficulties, persistent low mood, loss of interest in multiple activities, that's concerning for depression. Depression doesn't usually target just birthdays. It flattens everything. Work loses meaning. Hobbies feel pointless. Friendships seem exhausting. Sex becomes mechanical or absent. If birthdays are the only thing that's lost appeal, you're probably fine. If birthdays have joined a growing list of things that no longer matter, that's different. Dysthymia and chronic low mood. Major depression is episodic. It comes and goes, with relatively clear onset and, hopefully, remission. Dysthymia, now called persistent depressive disorder, is different. It's chronic low-grade depression that lasts years, sometimes decades. Not as dramatically impairing as major depression, but quietly corrosive, draining color from life without necessarily preventing function. People with dysthymia often describe life as gray. Not black like major depression, just persistently muted, dampened, less vibrant than it seems for others. Emotions are available, but subdued. Joy exists, but never reaches full intensity. Everything feels slightly distant, viewed through gauze. In this state, birthdays naturally lose significance, but so does everything else. The birthday joins a gray tapestry of undifferentiated days. Not because birthdays specifically don't matter, but because the emotional system that should differentiate special from ordinary has been chronically suppressed. The birthday should feel different, and somewhere the person knows this, but the felt difference doesn't materialize. This is suffering, not philosophy. People with dysthymia often don't realize they're depressed because the low mood has become their baseline. They think this is just how life is, how they are. They've forgotten what normal emotional range feels like. They describe themselves as not a birthday person, without recognizing they're also not fully a person who experiences joy in much of anything. The key diagnostic indicator: is this indifference causing distress or impairment? People with temperamental birthday indifference aren't bothered by it. They've made peace with being different from cultural norms. People with dysthymia often have a nagging sense that something's wrong, that they're missing something others experience, that life should feel richer than it does. They might not identify it as depression, but the quiet suffering is there. Schizoid personality disorder versus schizoid temperament. We discussed schizoid temperament earlier: preference for solitude, comfort with internal richness, genuine indifference to social validation. That's not pathology. Schizoid personality disorder is different. It crosses a threshold into dysfunction. The DSM-5 criteria for schizoid personality disorder include pervasive detachment from social relationships, restricted range of emotional expression, preference for solitary activities, little interest in sexual experiences, few or no close relationships, indifference to praise or criticism, emotional coldness or detachment. The pattern must be pervasive, inflexible, and cause significant impairment or distress. The clinical threshold is impairment. The person with healthy schizoid traits can form relationships when needed, shows appropriate emotional range and context, functions well socially when required even if they prefer not to. The person with schizoid personality disorder can't or doesn't, even when it costs them: jobs lost, family alienated, opportunities missed. Birthday indifference in schizoid personality disorder isn't isolated. It's part of comprehensive relational withdrawal. This person doesn't celebrate their birthday, doesn't attend others' celebrations, doesn't maintain friendships, doesn't pursue relationships, shows minimal emotional expression across all contexts. The birthday indifference is one symptom among many indicating profound disconnection from the social world. The distinction matters for how we interpret the behavior. Schizoid temperament says, I prefer solitude but can engage when I choose to. Schizoid personality disorder says, I'm cut off from connection in ways that limit my life. One is preference. The other is impairment. One requires respect. The other might benefit from intervention. Most people who don't celebrate birthdays aren't schizoid in the clinical sense. They have meaningful relationships, show emotional range, engage socially when it matters to them. The birthday is the exception, not the rule. But when birthday indifference is part of pervasive detachment, when it's symptomatic of broader relational dysfunction, that's clinically significant. Trauma and anniversary reactions. Trauma has temporal markers. The anniversary of traumatic events can trigger intense reactions, flashbacks, anxiety, somatic symptoms, mood changes. This is well documented in trauma literature. The body keeps the score, as Bessel van der Kolk titled his seminal work. The nervous system remembers dates even when conscious memory doesn't. For some people, birthdays are trauma anniversaries. Perhaps a loved one died on or near their birthday. Perhaps significant abuse occurred during birthday celebrations. Perhaps their birthday was used as leverage. I'll give you a good birthday if you do what I want, creating complicated associations between celebration and coercion. These individuals may avoid birthday celebration not from indifference, but from self-protection. The date triggers trauma responses: panic, dissociation, overwhelming emotion, physical symptoms. Treating the birthday as a normal day becomes a strategy for avoiding the trigger. If you don't mark it, maybe you won't be thrown back into the traumatic memory. If you keep it ordinary, maybe you can get through without fracturing. This avoidance can be adaptive in the short term. It prevents overwhelming activation. But long-term, trauma avoidance typically maintains PTSD rather than resolving it. The trigger retains power because it's never approached and processed. The birthday remains dangerous because it's never made safe. The phenomenology here is distinct. This isn't, I don't care about birthdays. It's, I can't handle what birthdays activate in me. There's often awareness that something's wrong, that this isn't normal indifference. There might be shame about it, feeling broken for not being able to celebrate like others do. There's usually other trauma symptoms: hypervigilance, nightmares, emotional numbing, avoidance patterns extending beyond birthdays. The birthday becomes another casualty of unresolved trauma, another life experience that can't be approached without activating the past. This deserves therapeutic attention, not philosophical rationalization. Social anxiety and avoidance. Social anxiety disorder centers on intense fear of social situations where you might be judged or embarrassed. Being the center of attention, the defining feature of birthday celebrations, is a classic trigger. All eyes on you. People watching your reactions. Expectations about how you should behave. The potential for embarrassment or inadequacy feels overwhelming. Some people with social anxiety claim birthday indifference to mask the underlying terror. They say they don't care about celebrating, but what they mean, sometimes without fully realizing it, is that they can't tolerate the exposure celebration requires. The indifference is defensive, protecting them from having to admit or face the anxiety. Treating the birthday as a normal day brings relief, but it's the relief of avoidance, not authentic preference. The anxiety isn't confronted or resolved, it's circumvented. This works, sort of, but it maintains the fear. Each year you avoid celebration, you reinforce the message that birthday attention is dangerous, that you can't handle being seen. Avoidance is powerfully reinforcing. You avoid the feared situation, anxiety drops, and your brain learns. Avoiding equals safety. This strengthens avoidance behavior, making it more likely you'll avoid next time. The pattern entrenches. What started as managing overwhelming anxiety becomes a rigid pattern that restricts life. The key here is internal experience. Someone with temperamental birthday indifference feels neutral or positive about their choice. Someone avoiding due to social anxiety feels relief tinged with shame, fear, awareness that they're protecting themselves from something that shouldn't feel so threatening. They might wish they could celebrate normally. They might feel defective for not being able to. Social anxiety often shows up elsewhere. avoiding presentations at work, declining social invitations, intense self-consciousness in groups, fear of eating in front of others, terror of phone calls. If birthday avoidance is part of this broader pattern, it's not really about birthdays. It's about pervasive fear of social judgment. Diagnostic humility. Having outlined concerning patterns, we must be careful. There's real danger in pathologizing normal personality variation. Most people who don't celebrate birthdays are psychologically healthy. They're not depressed, not traumatized, not personality disordered, not socially anxious. They're just different from the cultural norm, and difference isn't disorder. The psychiatric establishment has a troubled history of labeling difference as pathology. Homosexuality was a disorder until 1973. Women seeking autonomy were diagnosed with hysteria. Cultural nonconformity has been medicalized repeatedly. We must not repeat this error by assuming anyone who doesn't celebrate birthdays needs clinical attention. The dimensional nature of both personality and psychopathology complicates this. Where does introverted temperament end and schizoid personality disorder begin? When does low mood become clinical depression? These aren't binary categories with clear boundaries. They're spectrums, and most people exist in the vast middle ground where traits are present but not impairing. Red flags that warrant concern, sudden change in behavior, accompanying subjective distress, functional impairment in work or relationships, constellation of symptoms beyond just birthday indifference. If someone who previously enjoyed birthdays suddenly stops caring and seems flat or withdrawn in other ways, that's concerning. If someone's never cared about birthdays but functions well and feels satisfied with their life, that's fine. Context is everything. A trauma survivor avoiding birthday celebration while in active PTSD treatment is different from a lifelong introvert who's never been interested in parties. Someone in the depths of major depression experiencing anhedonia about everything is different from a stoic practitioner cultivating equanimity. The behavior looks similar. The meaning is entirely different. The importance of constellation cannot be overstated. Single symptoms rarely mean much. Depression isn't just anhedonia. It's anhedonia plus sleep disturbance plus concentration difficulty plus mood symptoms plus duration criteria. Schizoid personality disorder isn't just preferring solitude. It's a pervasive pattern across multiple domains causing impairment. One symptom in isolation usually means nothing clinically. If you're wondering whether your birthday indifference or someone else's is concerning, ask these questions. Is this new or long-standing? Is there distress about it? Does it impair functioning? Are there other symptoms? Is there suffering? If it's long-standing, egosyntonic, feels like me, doesn't cause impairment, exists in isolation, involves no suffering, it's probably just personality. If it's new, distressing, part of broader dysfunction, accompanied by suffering, that might warrant clinical attention. Most people reading or listening to this who don't celebrate birthdays will recognize themselves in the earlier discussion. The personality traits, the attachment patterns, the philosophical stances, the countercultural values. They won't recognize themselves here in the clinical discussion. That distinction is important. If this doesn't resonate, if you don't see yourself in these descriptions of suffering and impairment, you're almost certainly fine. Having explored when birthday indifference might signal clinical distress, we must return to the majority case, psychologically healthy people who simply don't find birthdays meaningful. They're not avoiding anything, not suffering from anything, not impaired by anything. They've simply organized their identity, their values, their meaning-making around frameworks where birthdays don't feature prominently. What can their perspective teach us about the nature of celebration itself? What does their existence reveal about how humans construct significance, about what we actually need versus what culture insists we need? That's the philosophical territory we return to, the question of what birthdays actually celebrate, and whether that celebration serves any essential human function or is just one more optional ritual in a life that can flourish without it. Chapter 11. The Philosophy of Celebration. What birthdays actually commemorate. Celebrating existence versus achievement. Strip away the cake and candles, the gifts and gatherings, and ask the foundational question, what are we actually celebrating? The answer isn't as obvious as it seems. Birthdays don't commemorate achievement or virtue or contribution. They celebrate something more fundamental and more philosophically fraught: the bare fact of existence. You are here. You continue to be here. That, apparently, deserves marking. But does it? This question sits at the heart of birthday indifference for many people who've examined what celebration actually means. There's a peculiar ontological claim embedded in birthday celebration. Mere existence is worth commemorating. Not what you've done with that existence, just the existence itself. You could have spent the year contributing nothing, harming others, wasting your potential. The birthday still arrives, still supposedly deserves recognition. Why? Most celebrations in human life commemorate doing, not being. Graduations celebrate educational achievement. Weddings celebrate commitment. Promotions celebrate professional accomplishment. Awards celebrate contribution. Even anniversaries celebrate the achievement of maintaining a relationship. These rituals say, you did something worth marking. Birthdays are different. They're the only major life celebration of pure being. You didn't do anything to earn another year. You simply continued existing, which, for most people in developed nations with modern healthcare, requires minimal effort. The birthday celebrates survival, but survival so passive it barely qualifies as achievement. Achievement-oriented cultures, particularly the United States and other highly individualistic, productivity-focused societies, struggle with this philosophically. We're taught worth comes from accomplishment, from productivity, from contribution. Your value is what you produce, what you achieve, what you can point to as evidence of your meaningful existence. Then comes the birthday, asking you to celebrate having produced nothing except more time alive. This creates cognitive dissonance for achievement-oriented people. They know intellectually they're supposed to feel the birthday matters. Culture insists it does. But their internal value system, built around doing, achieving, contributing, finds nothing to celebrate in mere temporal accumulation. Another year older isn't an achievement. It's just time passing while you either did or didn't accomplish what actually matters. There's a counter-argument worth considering. Celebrating existence requires existential courage. To say, I am worthy of celebration simply for being, without needing to justify that worth through achievement. That's philosophically radical. It challenges the achievement imperative. It claims inherent rather than earned value. It suggests existence itself is enough. But this argument only works if you accept essentialist metaphysics, the idea that humans have inherent worth independent of what they do. From an existentialist perspective, which holds that existence precedes essence, and we create our worth through choices and actions, celebrating mere existence makes no philosophical sense. You haven't created your essence yet by doing nothing except aging. The birthday commemorates nothing authentic. The arbitrary nature of annual markers. Here's a question rarely asked. Why does the Earth's revolution around the sun have anything to do with human significance? The planet orbits the star. This is celestial mechanics, physics, cosmic processes utterly indifferent to human meaning. Yet we've decided this particular orbital cycle, 365.25 days, should mark significant anniversaries in individual human lives. The arbitrariness is profound once you notice it. Nothing about you changes when you complete another solar orbit. Your cells don't know it's your birthday. Your consciousness doesn't fundamentally shift at midnight. You're the same person you were the day before, continuous with who you'll be the day after. The only thing that changes is a number, a human invention, a counting system we created to organize time. This reveals birthdays as deeply anthropocentric constructs. We've taken an astronomical event, Earth's orbit, and projected human significance onto it. We've decided these particular temporal intervals matter for marking individual lives. But step outside the human perspective, adopt a cosmic view, and the whole structure collapses into absurdity. You're a temporary arrangement of atoms on a small planet orbiting an average star in an unremarkable galaxy among billions of galaxies. The universe is 13.8 billion years old and will continue trillions of years after our sun dies. In this context, your personal trip around the sun, your birthday, registers as nothing. Not even a rounding error in cosmic time. Pure meaninglessness. This recognition triggers two opposite responses. One is terror, the existential horror of recognizing how utterly insignificant we are, how arbitrary our meaning-making is, how alone we are in an indifferent universe. This terror often drives people toward celebration, toward ritual, toward anything that generates human meaning against cosmic void. The other response is freedom. If birthdays are arbitrary, if cosmic processes have nothing to do with human significance, then we're free to decide what matters. We're not discovering significance in birthdays. We're creating it or not creating it, as we choose. This recognition can drain birthdays of inherited meaning, leaving them as neutral dates we can ignore if we prefer. The disconnect between cosmic indifference and personal meaning is total. The universe doesn't care about your birthday. It doesn't care about you. This can feel crushing or liberating, depending on whether you need cosmic validation for human meaning or whether you're comfortable creating meaning within the acknowledged arbitrariness of human existence. Communal joy versus individual experience. Emil Durkheim understood something crucial about ritual. It's not primarily for the individual at the center. It's for the community. Rituals create collective effervescence, binding groups together through shared experience, reinforcing social bonds, expressing collective values. The wedding isn't just for the couple, it's for the community to witness and celebrate commitment. The funeral isn't just about the deceased, it's for the living to process loss together. Birthdays function this way. Yes, they ostensibly celebrate the individual, but they also give the community an opportunity to express affection, to demonstrate care, to practice generosity, to strengthen bonds. The gathering says, "You matter to us. Your continued existence is something we value. We're taking time from our lives to mark yours." This creates a paradox for birthday indifference. When you treat your birthday as a normal day, you're not just declining personal celebration. You're declining the community's offering. You're refusing to let others express their care for you in the ritualized form culture provides. This can feel like rejection to them, even when you intend no such thing. The community has limited, scripted ways to show they care. Birthdays are one of them. By opting out, you're removing one opportunity for communal expression of affection. You might have good reasons. You don't like being the center of attention. You find the ritual hollow. You prefer connection in other forms. But from the community's perspective, you're blocking a channel through which they could have loved you. This illuminates a genuine tension. Individual autonomy says, "I get to decide how I'm celebrated, or whether I'm celebrated at all." Social connection says, "Relationships involve receiving as well as giving, including receiving in forms that may not perfectly match your preferences." Where's the balance? Some people resolve this by accepting minimal celebration, a quiet dinner rather than a party, acknowledgement rather than performance. They're compromising between personal preference and social obligation. Others draw a firm boundary. "This doesn't serve me, so I won't do it," in relationships that can't respect that aren't sustainable relationships. There's no universally right answer. It depends on your values, your relationships, your capacity for compromise. Gratitude and the birthday. There's an implicit narrative underneath birthday celebration. Thank you for being born. The celebration expresses gratitude for your existence, for your presence in others' lives. This seems straightforward, but it creates complex feelings for many people. Some people feel unworthy of this gratitude. They don't experience themselves as having contributed enough to justify others' appreciation. They see their flaws, their failures, their ordinariness. The gap between how they're being celebrated and how they experience themselves feels fraudulent. Being thanked for existing when you don't feel your existence has been particularly valuable creates intense discomfort. This connects to self-worth issues, certainly, but it's also a reasonable response to the structure of the celebration itself. If you're achievement-oriented, if you measure worth through contribution, if you genuinely haven't done much or proud of this year, then being celebrated for mere existence feels like you're accepting praise under false pretenses. You didn't do anything deserving gratitude. You just survived, often barely, often badly. The burden of being celebrated when you feel ordinary can be crushing. Everyone's telling you you're special. You matter. They're so glad you exist. And you're thinking, I'm not special. I'm completely ordinary. I'm not even sure I'm glad I exist. The cognitive dissonance between their celebration and your self-experience becomes unbearable. It's easier to decline the celebration than to accept recognition you fundamentally don't believe you deserve. Gratitude functions as relational currency, a way of exchanging acknowledgement, building reciprocity, maintaining connection. But what if you feel you haven't earned the currency? What if being given gratitude you don't believe you deserve feels like debt rather than gift? The birthday becomes obligation rather than celebration, and opting out becomes the only way to avoid accumulating relational debt you can't repay. This reveals something important. Birthday celebration assumes a baseline of healthy self-worth. It assumes you can receive gratitude for your existence without feeling fraudulent. For people who lack that baseline, whether from depression, trauma, insecure attachment, or simply accurate assessment of an unproductive year, the celebration feels like loving lie, and declining it feels more honest than accepting it. The unexamined life and ritual participation. Socrates claimed that the unexamined life is not worth living. He was arguing for philosophical reflection, for questioning assumptions, for thinking critically about how we live rather than simply defaulting to cultural norms. Apply this to birthdays, and an interesting question emerges. Have most people examined why they celebrate birthdays? Or are they simply doing what they've always done, what everyone does, what culture says they should do? Ritual participation often operates on inertia. You celebrate birthdays because your family always did, because your friends expect it, because it's normal. Not because you've examined the practice and concluded it serves meaningful purpose in your life. The ritual runs on autopilot, inherited and replicated without conscious choice. The examined life might lead to enthusiastic celebration. You think about it deeply and conclude birthdays are valuable, that they serve important psychological and social functions, that marking time and celebrating existence aligns with your values. The examined life might equally lead to intentional non-celebration. You think about it deeply and conclude birthdays don't serve you, that the ritual feels hollow, that you'd rather mark time and meaning differently. Both outcomes emerge from examination. Both can be authentic. What's inauthentic is unexamined participation or unexamined rejection. If you're celebrating birthdays because that's just what people do, without knowing why you're doing it, that's not authenticity. But if you're avoiding birthdays because you've never thought about it and just feel vaguely uncomfortable, that's not authenticity either. Authenticity, in Heidegger's sense, requires owning your choices, making them consciously, taking responsibility for how you live. An authentic birthday celebrator has examined the practice and chosen it. An authentic birthday non-celebrator has examined the practice and declined it. Both are living examined lives. Both are being authentic to themselves. This means we can't judge birthday indifference as superior or inferior to celebration. What matters is whether the choice is conscious, whether it's been examined, whether it genuinely reflects the person's values rather than just their anxieties, defenses, or cultural programming. Someone celebrating birthdays thoughtfully and meaningfully is living more authentically than someone avoiding them out of unexamined social anxiety. Someone avoiding birthdays out of genuine philosophical conviction is living more authentically than someone celebrating them out of mindless obligation. The phenomenology of celebration, what the experience actually feels like from inside, varies enormously. For some, birthday celebration feels joyful, connecting, meaningful. They experience genuine pleasure in gathering, in being recognized, in marking another year. For others, it feels performative, exhausting, hollow. They experience the gap between what they're supposed to feel and what they actually feel is alienating. Neither phenomenology is more valid. They're just different, and they lead reasonably to different choices about participation. The person for whom celebration feels genuinely nourishing should celebrate. The person for whom it feels depleting or false probably shouldn't, or should find a form that feels more authentic. The sociology of ritual tells us that societies need shared practices, collective moments, ways of binding people together across individual differences. Birthdays serve this function. They give us regular occasions to acknowledge each other, to practice generosity, to express connection. From this perspective, some level of birthday participation serves important social purposes even if it doesn't feel personally meaningful. But individual autonomy pushes back. You're not obligated to participate in every social ritual. You're allowed to decide which communal practices serve you and which don't. You can honor your society's need for binding rituals while declining to make your birthday one of the sites where that happens. You can find other ways to maintain social connection without submitting to every cultural script. The tension between individual autonomy and social obligation doesn't resolve neatly. We're simultaneously individuals with the right to live according to our own values and social beings embedded in communities with legitimate claims on us. Where you balance these competing demands depends on your personality, your culture, your specific relationships, your capacity for compromise. This philosophical exploration reveals that birthday indifference confronts us with fundamental questions we usually avoid. What deserves celebration, being or doing? Are birthdays meaningful or arbitrary? Do we owe communities participation in their rituals? Can we accept gratitude we don't feel we've earned? Have we examined our choices or simply inherited them? These aren't comfortable questions. They expose the constructed nature of meaning, the arbitrariness of cultural ritual, the loneliness of individual choice in an indifferent universe. Some people would rather not think about them. They'd rather celebrate birthdays because that's what people do, because it feels good enough, because questioning it opens more discomfort than it's worth. But others can't avoid these questions. They've thought about birthdays and found the practice wanting. They've examined the assumptions and rejected them. They've confronted the arbitrariness and decided not to participate in the collective fiction that solar orbits matter to human significance. And that's where our journey ends. If you like this video, you'll love this one, in which I've explained the psychology of deep thinkers. If you found this video helpful, consider subscribing. It really helps out the channel. Sleep well, and good night.